Ever stood in front of a door that had no business being where it was? Not a door in a wall, not a door in a house, a door set flat into the side of a hill, oak and iron and older than the road that runs past it, with grass grown up over the sill, and no building behind it because there is no building behind it, there is only hill, only dirt and shale and root going back into the dark of the mountain. And ever stood there and put your hand flat on that wood and felt the cold coming through it from the other side on a July afternoon, with the heat shimmering off the gravel behind you? If you have, then you already know the first thing anybody in Ashcombe, West Virginia, will tell you about their door. It does not open outward. It has never opened outward. It opens inward always. Only inward, and every man and woman raised in the hollow was taught before the age of 6 why that matters, and taught it in the same 6 words, and taught not to say them out loud after dark. A door that opens inward is not a door for getting out. A note before this one begins, and then I will not interrupt you again for a good long while. If this is the kind of case you would want more of, not 1, but 12, each one told out whole and slow and in a voice made for a dark room, there is a collection. It is called What the Hollow Keeps. 12 files, 9 counties, 4 states, 1861 to 1988. Every one of them a place with a rule, and every one of them a person who thought the rule was for other people. 10 hours and 20 minutes, start to finish. The link is in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. Now then, before I go on, tell me where you are watching this from. Put it in the comments. The town, the county, the country. I want to see how far this one reaches tonight. And if you have not already, hit subscribe. It is free, and it means the next one finds you. Now then, the man at the center of this is Owen Pruitt, and in the spring of 1979, he was 38 years old. He was a stonemason by trade, and he looked like one. Not big through the chest, but heavy in the forearms and the hands, with the flat thumbnails masons get from 40,000 small mistakes with a hammer. He had a quiet way of standing that people sometimes took for unfriendliness, and that was really just a man conserving himself. He had been born in Merrill County, West Virginia, in a house 4 miles from the door in the hillside, and he had left at 19 and stayed gone for the better part of 2 decades, which is a thing people from those hollows do, and then spend the rest of their lives explaining. He had gone to Columbus, Ohio, first, then Dayton, then back down to Charleston, laying block and setting stone, and, in the good years, doing restoration work on churches and courthouses, which he liked better than anything because the stone was already there, and all a man had to do was be worthy of it. And in Dayton, in 1964, he married a woman named Ruth Ellen Kesterson, who taught 4th grade, and who was, by every account anybody ever gave of her, an easy person to be around. She was not a beautiful woman in the way magazines mean it. She had a broad, plain, open face and hair, the color of a paper bag, and a laugh that came out of her sideways, half swallowed, like she had caught herself in the middle of it, and decided to let the rest go anyway. She was very good at arithmetic and very bad at directions. She hummed when she added figures. She could not carry a tune, and she knew it, and she hummed anyway, off-key and unbothered, and Owen said later that 15 years of marriage had trained him to hear that humming the way other men hear their own heartbeat, which is to say, not at all, until it stops. And here is the small thing about Ruth Pruitt that you need to hold on to. Hold on to it. I am going to hand it to you now, and you are not going to think much of it. And about 2 hours from now, you are going to remember I said that. Ruth counted stairs out loud. She had done it since she was a girl. Any staircase, anywhere, she counted the treads under her breath going up, and she always, on purpose, every single time got one wrong. She would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, or she would say 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. She thought it was funny. Her mother had thought it was maddening. Owen had asked her about it exactly once, early on, and Ruth had said, "If you count a thing right, you have finished with it. I like to leave a little unfinished." And then she had laughed that sideways laugh and gone up the rest of the stairs. She died on the 14th of October, 1977, in the kitchen of their house on Dearborn Avenue in Charleston, of a brain hemorrhage, at the age of 36. She was standing at the counter cutting the ends off green beans. Owen was in the yard. She was dead before the ambulance got out of the bay downtown. There was no illness before it, and no warning in it, and nothing anybody could have done, and the doctor told him that 4 separate times, in 4 slightly different arrangements of words, the way they do when they can see a man is not taking delivery. He buried her in Dayton, next to her mother, because that was where she had said she wanted to be, in a conversation they had once had as a joke. And then he did what a certain kind of man does. He worked. He took every job that came. He laid stone through the winter of 1977 and all through 1978, and he lost 11 pounds, and he stopped answering the telephone, and he sold the house on Dearborn Avenue in January of 1979 because he could not stand in that kitchen any more, could not put his hand on that counter, could not open that drawer where the paring knife still lived. So when the letter came from a lawyer in Merrow County telling him that his mother's brother, Dallas Pruitt, had died at the age of 81 and left him a house and 11 acres in Ashcombe, Owen Pruitt read it twice, and then sat down on the edge of a bed in a rented room and did not move for about an hour. He had not been back to Ashcombe since 1960. He had not spoken to his uncle Dallas since a phone call in 1971 that had lasted 4 minutes. He had, in his own words, no earthly reason to go back there, and every reason not to, and he went back anyway, and he could not tell anybody, then or afterward, exactly why. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is a story that has been told badly a great many times. Ashcombe, West Virginia, is not on most maps. It sits in Merrow County, in the eastern part of the state, in a hollow at the foot of a long humped ridge called Coldwater Knob, and you get to it off State Route 9, by way of a county road that the state took over in 1953 and has regretted ever since. The 1970 census put the population at 309. The 1980 census put it at 261. There was a post office from 1884 until 1992. There was a school through 8th grade until 1966, and after that the children rode a bus 41 minutes each way to Hendon. The town has one paved street, called Front Street, and 4 gravel ones. It has a church, Ashcombe Free Will Baptist, built in 1891. It has a store, which in 1979 was called Teague's, and sold gasoline, feed, ammunition, bread, bologna, and about 900 other things, and which had a hand-lettered sign in the window that had been there so long the sun had eaten the words off it. And about a mile and a half east of Front Street, where the county road bends hard around the base of Coldwater Knob, and the hillside comes down close enough to the road that you could touch it out a car window, there is a door. It is 7 feet, 1 inch tall. It is 3 feet, 4 inches wide. It is white oak, laid up in 5 vertical planks, joined with hand-forged straps and clenched nails, and it sits in a frame of dressed stone that goes back into the hillside, a depth nobody has ever satisfactorily measured. The stone is not local. That is the first thing that makes people uncomfortable when they learn it. The shale in that ridge is a soft gray-brown that flakes in your hand. The doorframe is a hard, fine-grained pale stone that geologists from Morgantown looked at in 1958 and again in 1974, and both times said, in essence, this did not come from here, and both times declined to say where it did come from. The door has no handle on the outside, no latch, no ring, no pull. There is a keyhole, or something shaped like a keyhole, set low and off-center, and nobody in living memory has had a key. And the door opens inward. That sounds like nothing. I know. It sounds like a fact about carpentry. Let me tell you why the people in that hollow do not think it is nothing. A door that opens inward cannot be barred from outside. You can pile a mountain against the outside of an inward opening door, and it will not hold that door shut. Everything you do on the outside, every stone, every timber, every prayer is just decoration. The only thing that can ever hold a door like that closed is something standing on the inside of it, pushing back. And in Ashcombe, they will tell you, if they will tell you anything at all, that something always has been. I am going to come back to that. I am going to come back to it several times, and each time I am going to be able to tell you a little more than the time before, and I want to warn you now that the last thing I tell you about that door will not be the thing you expect. It is not what is behind it. Everybody guesses at what is behind it. Nobody guesses right, and the reason nobody guesses right is that they are all asking the wrong question. The right question is why it was built with a keyhole. But that comes later. Let me put you in the truck with Owen Pruitt on the 9th of April, 1979, because that is where this starts. He drove a 1971 Ford F-100, green over white, with 140,000 miles on it and a bed full of tools he had not been able to bring himself to sell. He left Charleston at 6 in the morning. It is 182 miles from the south side of Charleston to the Ashcombe turnoff, and it took him 5 hours and 10 minutes because the last 30 of those miles are not miles the way the rest of them are miles. The land does something as you go east into Merrill County. It stops being hills and starts being ridges, long parallel folds running northeast to southwest, like something had raked the ground with 4 fingers and left it that way, and the roads have no choice but to run in the grooves. You do not drive over that country. You drive along the inside of it. The sky narrows. By 11 in the morning, Owen had the sun on his left shoulder and a wall of green on his right, close enough that he could see individual leaves at 40 miles an hour, and he had that feeling that everyone who grew up in a hollow knows and cannot describe to anybody who did not. The feeling of the land closing around you like a hand closing gently, not to crush, just to hold. He stopped at a filling station in Hendon, which is the county seat and has 1,100 people and a courthouse with a clock that has been 11 minutes slow since 1949. He bought gas and a bottle of orange soda and a pack of crackers, and the woman at the register asked him where he was headed, the way they do. He said, "Ashcombe," and she said, "Oh," and rang him up, and when she handed him his change, she said, "You got people there?" He said, "Had. My uncle passed." And she said, "Dallas Pruitt, not a question." He had been dead 9 weeks, and this woman 13 miles away in another town knew exactly who had died in Ashcombe, which tells you something about that country that a census will not. Owen said, "You knew him?" She said, "Everybody knew Dallas. He come in here every Thursday for 30 years for chicken feed and a grappette." She looked at him a second longer than she needed to. Then she said, "You be all right up there?" And Owen Pruitt, who had grown up 4 miles from that door, said, "I imagine." And she said, "Well," and that was the whole of it. And he carried the crackers out to the truck, and he told me years later, through the man I will introduce you to at the end of this, that he sat in the cab for a full minute before he turned the key, because he had realized what her face was doing. She was not being nosy. She was being polite to a man she had already decided to feel sorry for. The county road into Ashcombe runs 11.5 miles off State Route 9. It crosses Kettle Creek 4 times on 4 different bridges, 1 steel, 3 concrete, and it climbs and drops so much that the elevation gain over those 11 miles is more than 1,800 feet total, even though the start and finish are within 90 feet of each other. There is 1 guardrail on the whole run. There is a place at mile 7 where the road has slid twice, in 1963 and 1984, and both times the state has simply moved the road 4 feet uphill and repaved rather than fix the slope. And at mile 9.5, the road comes around the shoulder of Coldwater Knob, and the hillside on the left comes down steep and close, and there is a wide gravel pull-off on the right that has no earthly reason to be there, no view, no trailhead, no mailbox, a pull-off big enough for 6 vehicles. Kept clear, gravel fresh enough that somebody has put gravel on it in the last few years. And across the road from that pull-off, set into the hill, is the door. Owen slowed down without deciding to. He told it this way. He said his foot came off the gas the way your foot comes off the gas when you pass a wreck before you have finished seeing it. He had seen that door 10,000 times as a boy. He had walked past it going to and from the creek. He had once, at the age of 11, on a dare from a boy named Tuck Renner, run up and slapped the wood with the flat of his hand, and run back, and he had been beaten for it by his mother with a switch off a forsythia bush, and he had never in his life seen his mother that afraid, before or after. He did not stop that day. He wants that on the record, and I am putting it on the record. On the 9th of April, 1979, Owen Pruitt drove past the door in the hillside at about 11 miles an hour and did not stop. And he looked at it the whole way past, and the thing he noticed, the first thing, the small thing, the thing he did not think about again for 11 days, was that the grass in front of it was flat, not worn, not a path, flat in a half circle, the way grass goes flat under something heavy that has sat there a while and then been moved. 2 miles on, the hollow opens up, and Ashcombe sits in the bottom of it with the ridge behind it, going up 800 feet, and the whole town takes about 4 seconds to see. He drove down Front Street past the church and the store and 11 houses, and turned left onto Bickle Road, gravel, and went up a 1/4 mile, and there was his uncle's place. It was a 4-room frame house, built in 1922, white once, gray now, with a tin roof and a porch across the front, and a stone chimney at the north end that Owen's own grandfather had laid in 1923. Behind it a barn, a corn crib, a spring house over a spring that ran 41 gallons a minute year-round, and 11 acres of pasture and woods going up the slope. There was a walnut tree in the side yard with a rope still hanging off it that had had a tire on it in 1951. He sat in the truck in the yard for a while. Then he got out, and the first thing he heard was nothing. I want to spend a second on that, because it matters later, and because everybody who goes into that hollow says the same thing, and they all say it badly. They say it was quiet. It was not quiet. Quiet is an absence. This was a presence. There were birds, he could see them. He counted 4 crows working the far edge of the pasture, and there was wind moving in the tops of the trees on the ridge, and there was the spring running. So there was sound. There was plenty of sound. It just did not carry. Owen described it later as standing in a room with heavy curtains. Every noise arrived to him with the edges taken off, like the air itself had been packed with something. He clapped his hands once, in the yard, at 11:30 in the morning, just to hear it. He said the clap died about 15 feet from his hands and did not come back off the barn, and the barn was 40 feet away, sheet metal on the near side, and it should have come back. He went inside. Dallas Pruitt had died in that house on the 2nd of February, 1979, sitting in a chair by the stove, and a neighbor had found him 2 days later, and the house had been shut up since. It smelled like cold ash and old coffee, and the particular smell of a place where a man has lived alone for a very long time. There were 4 rooms, kitchen, front room, 2 bedrooms, and a loft you got to by a set of boxed stairs behind a plank door in the kitchen. 11 stairs, that loft. Owen counted them the first time he went up, and he did not think about why he had counted them, and I am telling you now that he counted them, and I am telling you it was 11, and I want you to keep that number. The house was clean. That is worth saying. His uncle had been 81, and living alone in a house with no telephone and a hand pump at the sink, and the floors were swept, the dishes were put up, the bed was made, there was a Bible on the table by the chair. There was a calendar from Fenner's Hardware in Hendon on the kitchen wall, with the days crossed off in pencil up through the 1st of February. And on the inside of the front door, this is the first thing Owen saw that he could not explain away, there were 4 iron brackets. Not a lock, not a chain. 4 brackets, hand-forged, mortised into the door itself and into the frame, on both sides, 2 at chest height and 2 at knee height, sized to take a bar. And leaning in the corner behind the door, a bar. White oak, 4 feet, 1 inch long, 3 inches by 3 inches, worn smooth in the middle where a hand had lifted it and set it down some enormous number of times. Owen picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He set it in the brackets and it dropped in with a sound like a bolt going home, and the door was, in that instant, not going to open for anything short of an automobile. He took it out again and leaned it back in the corner. And he said out loud, in the empty house, "Well, all right." He found the same brackets on the back door and on the inside of the door to the spring house. And, later, on the inside of the barn's man door, which is a thing that makes no sense at all, because a barn door is barred to keep something out of your barn, and you do that from the outside, unless you are expecting to be inside the barn at a time when you would rather not be found. That is the setup: a man, a house, a bar, and 11 acres. Hold on to the bar, hold on to the 11 stairs. And now let me introduce you to the man who gave Owen Pruitt his 3 warnings, because he gave them on the second day, and he gave them badly, and he gave them in the wrong order. And one of those 3 warnings was wrong, and Owen would not learn which one until the 2nd week of June. His name was Hollis Teague. In 1979 he was 66 years old, and he had run the store on Front Street since his father died in 1951, and before that he had run it with his father since 1934, which means that by 1979 Hollis Teague had stood behind that same counter for 45 years and watched every single person in that hollow come through that door and buy the things people buy. He was a short, wide man with a bald head he kept covered indoors and out, and reading glasses on a string, and a way of speaking that was slow without being stupid, the pace of a man who has learned that in a small place, a sentence you have not finished can always still be changed. Owen walked down on the morning of the 10th of April to buy coffee, flour, lard, lamp oil, matches, and a broom. The store was 1 room, 30 feet by 50, with shelves to the ceiling and a wood stove in the middle and 4 chairs around the stove, of which 2 were occupied, and both occupants stopped talking when he came in and did not start again. Hollis Teague looked at him over the reading glasses for about 4 seconds and said, "You'd be Ida's boy." Owen said, "Owen Pruitt." Hollis said, "I know what you are." I said, "Whose you are?" And he came around the counter and shook his hand, and that was the whole of the welcome, and it was, by the standards of that hollow, effusive. They talked about the house. Hollis said Dellis had kept it up better than a man that age had any right to. They talked about the roof, which needed 4 sheets replaced on the north slope. Owen said he intended to stay a while and see about it, and Hollis said, "Through the summer?" And Owen said he supposed so. And one of the 2 men by the stove, Owen never learned his name that day, but he was a man of about 70 in a brown coat, got up and went out without buying anything and without saying goodbye. Hollis watched him go. Then he sacked the flour and the lard, and he said, without looking up, "You remember much from when you was a boy here?" Owen said, "Some." Hollis said, "You remember the rules?" And Owen Pruitt, 38 years old, a grown man with 140,000 miles on his truck, felt the back of his neck go cold in a warm store in April, because he did remember, not the words, the shape of them. The way you remember a hymn you have not sung since you were 9, he said. "I remember there were rules." Hollis Teague set both hands flat on the counter. He said, "I will tell you 3 things. I will tell them to you one time, and I will answer one question about them, and then I am not going to speak on it again, not to you and not to anybody, and if you come in here next week wanting to talk about it, I will sell you what you came for, and I will talk to you about the weather. That is not me being hard. That is the way it is done here, and there is a reason for it. Do you want them?" Owen said, "Yes." Hollis said, 1. Do not knock on the door. He let that sit. Then he said, "Not with your hand, not with a stick, not with a rock, not to be funny, not on a dare, not drunk. Boys do it. Boys have always done it. Most of the time nothing happens. I want you to hear that most of the time nothing happens. And that is the worst part of it, because it means everybody in this hollow knows somebody who did it and was fine. And they all know one who wasn't. 2. If you ever come around that bend and find that door standing open, you do not go to it. You do not look in it, and you do not close it. You turn around and you go the other way, and you come and tell me, or you tell Orlean Cobb, and one of us will see to it. Do not close it. I want to say that twice. If the door is open, somebody opened it from the inside, and closing it puts you between the hill and the thing that opened it. There is a right way to shut that door, and you do not know it. 3. And here, Owen said. Hollis Teague looked away for the first time. He looked at the window. 3. If you hear your name called from up the hill, at night, in a voice you know it will not say it twice. Whatever calls you from the knob says your name one time and then waits. A person hollers twice. A person hollers till you answer. So, if it comes one time and then it is quiet, you stay where you are and you bar your door. That is the tell. That is the only tell you get. And then he said, You get one question. Now, I want you to think about what you would have asked. Because Owen Pruitt had about 100 questions standing in a line behind his teeth. What is behind the door? What is in the hill? Who built it? What happened to the ones who weren't fine? Why is there a keyhole? What he actually asked was this. He said, Why is my uncle's barn barred from the inside? And Hollis Teague's face did something. Owen described it as the look of a man who has been handed a bill he thought he had already paid. Hollis said, Because Dallas Pruitt spent a night in that barn in October of 1968, and he did not come in the house till morning. Owen said, And? Hollis said, That's your question answered. Your total's $4.16. And that was all. And Owen paid, and carried his sack out. And Hollis Teague did not speak of it to him again for 7 weeks. And when he finally did, it was to tell him something that changed everything, and he told it to him in a car, in the rain, on the county road, with the engine running. But that is a long way off yet. 3 warnings. Do not knock. Do not close it. It says your name once. 2 of those are good. One of them is going to nearly kill him. The first night was the 9th. The first bad night was the 21st. In between there were 11 days of ordinary work, and I want to walk you through those 11 days, because everything that makes this case what it is happens in the small stuff, and if I skip to the screaming, you will not understand why the screaming matters. Owen woke at first light on the 10th because there was nothing to keep the light out of that house. He built a fire in the cook stove. He found that the water in the hand pump ran clear after 11 strokes and rusty for the first 4. He ate crackers. He walked the property line, which took him an hour and 10 minutes, and found the fence down in 2 places on the upper side where the pasture meets the woods. And at the top of the pasture, where the grass stops and the woods start, he found the tree line. I need you to picture this correctly. In that country, where pasture meets woods, you get a ragged edge, a mess. Blackberry canes, sumac, little sassafras, and locust coming up in the light, brush piled where somebody dozed it years ago, greenbrier over everything. It is not a line. It is a zone, 10 or 20 feet deep, of things fighting each other for the sun. Owen Pruitt walked the top of his uncle's pasture on the 10th of April, 1979, and the woods began in a line. Grass, then trees, nothing in between. No brush, no canes, no saplings, no leaf litter drifted out into the field. Grass right up to the trunks, and the trunks standing in a line so straight that Owen, who is a mason, whose whole trade is knowing when a thing is true and when it is a quarter bubble off, got out the mason's line he carried in his coat pocket out of habit, and stretched it 80 feet along that edge, from a fence post to a fence post. The trees were straight to the line within about 4 inches over 80 feet. Nobody planted them. They were mixed hardwood, different ages, oak and hickory and maple and one enormous beech, and the biggest of them was better than 200 years old. You do not plant a mixed hardwood stand in a line in 1780 and have it still be a line in 1979, and you certainly do not have every seed that stand has dropped for 2 centuries decline to sprout on the pasture side. He stood there with his line in his hands for a long time. Then he did what men do, which is he came up with a reason. He decided somebody had bush-hogged it hard for years, his uncle, probably, or his uncle's father, and the mowing had made the edge and the grass had held it. That is a real thing that happens. That is a perfectly good explanation. It is also completely wrong, and he knew it was wrong, because he had walked the whole 11 acres that morning, and there was not a bush hog on the place, and Dellis Pruitt had been 81 years old, and the last time anybody had run a tractor in that pasture, by the look of the sod, was somewhere in the middle 1960s. Here is what I want you to sit with. He knew. That is the part people get wrong about hauntings. They imagine a person being fooled. Owen Pruitt was not fooled for one single day. He stood at that tree line on his second morning and knew, in his hands, in his mason's hands, that the edge of those woods was not a natural edge. And he went back down to the house and fixed the fence, because that is the other thing about people. Knowing and acting are 2 different muscles, and grief cuts the tendon between them. And there is one more detail about that tree line that he did not write down until the 9th of May, when he went back through everything, and I want it in the record now rather than later. The line was not straight the whole way. 80 feet of it, from the fence post at the east end going west, was true within 4 inches, and then, near the middle of the pasture, at a place where a spring seep comes down out of the woods and makes about 20 feet of soft ground, the line bowed out toward the house, in a shallow curve, maybe 11 feet deep at the middle of it. And then it came back and was true again for the rest of the run. A mason will tell you that is worse than a crooked line. A crooked line is nature. A straight line with one deliberate bow in it is a line somebody laid out around something. He went and stood in the middle of that bow on the 11th of April, 1979, in the wet ground by the seep, and there was nothing there. Grass, water, a little watercress, a flat rock about the size of a card table with moss on 3 sides of it. 3 sides. The 4th side, the side facing the woods, was clean. The 11th and 12th he spent on the roof. He got 4 sheets of tin in Hendon and drove them back and spent 2 days on the north slope in the sun. He found, working up there, that he could see a piece of the county road through the gap in the ridge, about 1.5 miles off, and he could see, at that distance, the gravel pull-off. Not the door. The hill hides the door until you are on it, but the pull-off, yes, a pale patch in the green. He looked at it more than he meant to. He caught himself doing it 4 or 5 times a day. And on the evening of the 12th, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the light go off the top of the ridge, he saw a vehicle stop at the pull-off. He was too far away to say what it was, a dark car or a dark truck. It sat there, he estimated, 11 or 12 minutes. Then it pulled out and went on toward town, and it did not come through town because he would have heard it on Front Street and seen the headlights swing. It went the other way, and there is no other way. The county road dead ends at Ashcombe. You come in and you go back out. That is the whole geography. He thought about that for a while. He decided he had missed the sound of it, or misjudged the time, or that it had turned around and he had looked away. He would see a vehicle at that pull-off 11 more times before the summer was over. He would eventually count them because he counted everything by then, and I will tell you now that in the last week of it, he stopped counting vehicles and started counting something else, and the something else is why he got out alive. On the 14th of April, he went down to the store again and met the town, more or less, all at once, because it was a Saturday, and Saturday morning is when a hollow does its business. There were 9 people in Teague's store when he walked in, and every one of them knew who he was. He got introduced to a man named Curtis Renner, who turned out to be the older brother of that same Tuck Renner who had dared him to slap the door in 1952. He got introduced to a woman named Lovey Sizemore, 73, who had taught the 3rd grade at the Ashcombe School until it closed, and who said, "I had you. You could not sit still, and you could draw a horse better than any child I ever had in that room." He got introduced to a young man of about 25, Dwight Renner, Curtis's son, who worked at the sawmill in Hendon, and who was the only person under 40 Owen saw in Ashcombe that whole first month. And while he was standing there with his hat in his hand being looked over, he noticed the board. It hung on the wall behind the stove, to the left of the stovepipe, where it had clearly hung for a very long time. The wall around it was a different shade than the wall behind it. It was a piece of poplar plank, about 14 inches by 30, planed smooth and darkened almost black with smoke and age, and it was covered in tally marks. Cut in, not written, knife cut, 4 uprights and a diagonal, in rows, from the top left going down, and the rows went all the way to the bottom of the board and then started again on a second board below it that was newer, lighter wood, and that second board was about a third full. Owen counted the marks on the newer board later. On a later visit, when Hollis was out back, he counted fast, and he counted twice, and he got 51 both times. He asked, "That first Saturday, in a room with 9 people in it, what's the tally for?" And here is what happened. Nobody answered. Not a hostile silence. Something worse. Lovey Sizemore looked at the floor. Curtis Renner turned around and looked at a shelf of motor oil like he had come in for motor oil. A woman by the door went out, and Hollis Teague said in an absolutely pleasant voice, "You want that coffee ground or whole bean?" And Owen said, "Ground." And Hollis ground it. Curiosity is a thing you can survive most places. In Ashcombe, it was a thing you were expected to put down like a hat when you came inside. But Lovey Sizemore followed him out. She caught him at the truck, 73 years old, in a man's barn coat over a house dress, and she put her hand on the door of his truck and she said, quick and low, "Don't ask him that again." Owen said, "Why not?" And Lovey Sizemore said, "Because he is the one that has to cut them." And she went back inside. 51 marks on the new board, and an old board full, above it, and the old board. Owen went back later with a flashlight. In June, under circumstances, I will get to the old board had, by his best count, somewhere over 400. Now here is the question that ought to be forming, and I want you to hold it, because everybody who hears this story asks it in the wrong order. The question is not what the marks count. You have probably already guessed at that, and you have probably guessed something like deaths or disappearances or nights the door stood open. The right question is, why would a man cut a mark for a thing instead of writing it down? What is the advantage? Why a knife and not a pencil? There is an answer. Orlean Cobb gave it to him on the 19th of May in about 11 words, and when she did, Owen Pruitt had to go outside and stand in her yard for a minute. I will get there. The 15th through the 20th were, on paper, good days. He worked, he got the roof done, he cleaned the barn, which had 40 years of accumulated everything in it. He found his uncle's tools, good ones, hand tools with the handles worn to the shape of a specific dead man's grip. He found a crate of ball jars. He found in the corn crib a 1954 license plate and a stack of grit newspapers going back to 1959. He slept badly, but he had been sleeping badly for 18 months and did not attribute it to the house. And in those 6 days he noticed 4 things, and I am going to give them to you in the order he noticed them, which is not the order they matter. The first thing was the lamps. The house had no electricity. There were poles as far as the Mullins place, a half-mile down Bickle Road, and the line had never been run the last stretch. Dellis had refused it in 1952 and again in 1966, and nobody in town would tell Owen why a man refuses free electricity twice. So, kerosene lamps. He had 3, plus a lantern. And on the evening of the 16th, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 lamps lit, oiling a saw, he watched both lamps dim at the same instant. Not flicker, dim, both of them, together, down to maybe half, and hold there for a count of about 4, and come back. There was no draft. He checked. He had the doors shut and the windows down, and there was no wind that night at all. He went out and stood in the yard to be sure, and the walnut tree was dead still. And a lamp is not an electric bulb. 2 wicks in 2 separate reservoirs of 2 different ages of kerosene do not agree on anything. They cannot dim in unison. There is no physical mechanism, short of the air in the room itself changing, for 2 flames 11 feet apart to drop and hold and rise as if one hand were doing it. It happened again on the 18th, and on the 20th, and after that he stopped writing it down because by then he was writing down other things. The second thing was the temperature at the head of the stairs. Those 11 stairs behind the plank door in the kitchen went up to a loft where his uncle had stored corn and, apparently, slept in the summers as a young man. There was a straw tick up there and a window in the gable end. And every time Owen went up those stairs, somewhere around the 8th or 9th tread, he passed through cold. Now, cold air sinks. Everybody knows this. In a house with a stove going, the loft should be the warmest place in the building, and the floor should be the coldest, and the coldest spot of all should be the bottom of an enclosed stairwell. That is not opinion. That is the reason people have lofts. He measured it. He had a thermometer from the truck, the kind you hang in a shop. He set it on the 4th tread for 20 minutes, 61 degrees. He set it on the 9th tread for 20 minutes, 48 degrees, 13 degrees colder, 5 feet higher, in a closed stairwell with a fire going. He moved it a 4th time and got 47. He put his hand out and felt the edge of it, and he said the edge was sharp, that he could hold his hand at the height of the 8th tread and feel his fingers cold and his wrist warm, with maybe 3 inches between them. The third thing was the barn. He noticed it on the 19th, and he noticed it because he is a mason, and if you are ever going to be haunted, I recommend being haunted in front of a tradesman, because a tradesman notices things a professor cannot. The barn was built in 1926. Frame barn, 40 by 60, on a stone foundation his grandfather laid. And on the 19th of April, standing in the yard at about 4 in the afternoon with a cup of coffee, Owen looked at the barn and knew something was wrong with it, and could not, for perhaps 90 seconds, say what. Then he saw it. The near corner, the southwest corner, the one nearest the house, was not square. He went and got his framing square and a level, and he checked it. Foundation, level, within a 1/16 over 8 feet. Corner post, plumb. The sill, true. Every measurement he took said the barn was square, and when he stepped back into the yard, 40 feet away, and looked at it, the corner leaned. He did this 11 times over 3 days. Up close, true. 40 feet back, wrong, by what he judged to be about 1.5 inches of lean over a 14-foot wall, which is a lot. That is a thing you would see instantly, and that would have had the barn down in a windstorm 40 years ago. He finally set up a transit. He owned one, a good one, a burger, in a wooden case, because a mason who does restoration work learns to shoot his own lines. He set it up in the yard and sighted the corner post, plumb. He looked through the transit at a plumb corner. He lifted his eye from the transit and looked at the same corner with his own eye from the same spot, and it leaned. Owen Pruitt sat down in his uncle's yard on the 21st of April, 1979, with a $400 instrument beside him, and understood that the problem was not the barn. And the fourth thing was the footprints. And the footprints are where this stops being strange and starts being a case. It rained on the night of the 20th of April, 2¼ inches, which he knew because his uncle had a rain gauge on a post by the spring house, and Owen had gotten in the habit of reading it. It rained hard from about 9 in the evening until some time before 4 in the morning, and it left the pasture soft and the bare ground around the barn like a printing plate. On the morning of the 21st he came out at about 6:30 to feed nothing. He had no stock. He just went out, the way a man does, and there were footprints in the mud between the barn and the house. They came out of the pasture from the direction of the tree line. They came down the slope in a straight line, not the wander of a man walking his own land, and they came to within about 20 feet of the back of the house, and then they turned, and they went back up, bare feet. Adult. He measured them, 10.5 inches heel to toe, about 4 inches across the ball, which is a fair-sized man or a large woman. Toes clear, arch clear, human in every particular, and there was nothing at all wrong with them individually. The problem was the stride. Coming down the hill toward the house, the prints were 26 inches apart, center to center. That is a walk. That is a person moving at an ordinary pace on a slope. Going back up the hill, the same prints, same foot, same size, same tread of the same barefoot in the same mud were 41 inches apart. Now, you may be thinking, he ran. Of course. Something spooked him, and he ran back up the hill, and a running man has a longer stride. 2 problems. The first is that a running barefoot man on wet grass on an 11-degree slope leaves a torn print. He digs in. The toes gouge, the heel skids, the sod tears. These prints were not torn. Every single one of them, going up, was a clean, flat, whole print, pressed straight down. Toes, arch, heel, all at even depth. That is not a running foot. That is a standing foot. That is what a footprint looks like when a person is standing still. 41 clean standing prints, spaced 41 inches apart, going up a hill. The second problem is what Owen found when he followed them. And he did follow them. He followed them the whole way up the pasture with his heart going. And they went to the tree line, and at the tree line they stopped. Not entered the woods, stopped. The last print was 6 inches from the trunk of a hickory, facing the woods, both feet together, side by side, like a man standing at attention. And then nothing. No prints in the leaf litter. No disturbance. Nothing on the pasture side. Nothing on the wood side. He stood at that tree line for a while. Then he went down and got a shovel, which is not a weapon, and came back up, and stood there some more, and did not go into the woods. That was the 21st. That was the day, because that night was the first bad night. He barred the door. That is worth noting. He had been barring the front door since the first night, not out of fear, but because the bar was there, and a bar in brackets is an invitation, and because he had grown up in that hollow, and some things go in a man before he is old enough to argue with them. He went to bed at about 9:30 in the back bedroom, which was the smaller of the two, because the front bedroom had been his uncle's, and he could not sleep in a dead man's bed yet. He had one lamp turned low on the dresser. He lay there a long while. At what he later put at somewhere between 11 and midnight, he had a watch, but he did not look at it, and he was honest about that afterward, and I appreciate a man who tells you where his account is soft. The cold came into the room, not a draft. He was very clear on that, always. Not air moving. He said it came in the way water comes into a boat, from the bottom, filling. He said he felt it first on the back of his hands, lying on top of the quilt, and then along his jaw, and then his breath was visible in the light of the lamp, in a house with a banked stove 11 feet away, in April, in a room that had been 68 degrees an hour before. And the lamp went down to half and held. He did not move. He said afterward that he could not tell whether he did not move because he was afraid or because he was waiting to see, and that in his experience those turn out to be the same thing. And then somebody walked across the porch. 4 steps. He counted them. He counted them without deciding to, the way you do. 4 steps, unhurried, from the direction of the yard toward the front door. On boards he had walked on 100 times in the last 12 days, and knew the sound of the third board from the steps had a knot in it, and gave a particular flat pop under weight, and it popped. And then the sound stopped at the door, and nothing knocked. He lay there. He said the not knocking went on so long that he began to hope for a knock, and that when he understood he was hoping for it, that was the moment he got up. He got up, and he went into the front room in his socks with the lamp in his hand, and he stood 8 feet back from the front door with the bar in its brackets, and he looked at it, and the doorknob turned, slowly, all the way. He watched the mechanism go around, and the latch draw back with a small click, and then the door moved a quarter inch, maybe half, as far as an inward opening door can move against 4 inches of white oak, and stopped. And here is the thing that Owen Pruitt told exactly 3 people in his life, and one of them told me. The door was pushed steadily for a long time, not rattled, not shaken. There was no violence in it at all. It was pressed, evenly, patiently, the way you would press on a door you expected to give, and the bar took the load, and the brackets creaked, and the doorframe made a small tick as the whole house took up the strain. And it went on, he said, for 4 or 5 minutes. Nothing that wants in a house pushes on a door for 5 minutes. A bear does not. A man does not. A man tries the door, finds it barred, and either goes away or breaks it. 5 minutes of steady pressure is not an attempt to enter. It is a demonstration. It is somebody saying, I am here, and this is what is between us, and I want you to spend some time thinking about how thick it is. Then the pressure came off. The door settled back, and the porch board popped once 1 step, going away, and that was all. He did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the stove, with the lamp lit and the bar in the brackets, and he watched that door until the window went gray. At first light he went out. There were no footprints on the porch. The porch was dry, it had not rained that night, so that proves nothing, and Owen said so himself. There was mud in the yard, though, left over from the rain of the 20th. And in the mud, at the bottom of the porch steps, there were 4 bare footprints, 2 coming, 2 going. Same foot, 10.5 inches, and the 2 coming were 26 inches apart, and the 2 going were 41. He drove to Hendon that morning and bought a 2-cell flashlight, 4 boxes of shells for a shotgun he did not own, a shotgun, and 11 pounds of rock salt, because a man from that country does not have to be told about salt any more than he has to be told about barring a door. And on the way back, at about 2 in the afternoon, on a clear day, he pulled off at the gravel pull-off across from the door in the hillside and got out of the truck. I want to be careful telling this part. He did not knock. He wants that known, and I am going to keep saying it, because it matters at the end. He crossed the road. The bank comes up steep on the north side, and the door sits in it about 4 feet above road level, with 3 flat stones set as steps, worn dished in the middle, worn by a very great deal of use. The frame is that pale hard stone, and up close you can see the joints are so tight you cannot get a knife blade in them, and there is no mortar anywhere in it. Dry laid, and dry laid so well that in some unknown number of centuries the frame has not moved a 1/16 of an inch, because the door still fits it exactly. Owen Pruitt, 38 years old, a mason for 20 years, stood on those steps and looked at the joints in that stone and said out loud, I could not do that. And he meant it as a professional, and it came out of his mouth as a prayer. The wood was gray with age and hard as iron. The straps were hand-forged and had been replaced at least twice. You could see 3 generations of nail holes. The keyhole was set low, about 34 inches off the sill, off-center to the left, and it was not a modern keyhole. It was a plain rectangular slot, about 1.5 inches wide and a 1/2 inch tall, and there was no wear around it. None. Not a scratch. Nothing had ever been put in that hole and turned. In however long that door has stood there, nobody has ever had the key. He put his palm flat on the wood. It was cold. 68 degrees in the sun on the 22nd of April, and the door was, in his estimation, near 40. Cold enough that his hand pulled back on its own after 4 or 5 seconds. And there was a sound. He described it as the sound of a room. Not a noise in the room, the sound a large empty space makes, that low pressure you can feel in your ears when you walk into a church or a cave, the difference between a wall with a house behind it and a wall with a hill behind it. There was a hill behind that door. There is nothing behind that door but 800 vertical feet of cold water knob, and it sounded like a room. He got back in his truck and drove home, and he did not stop at that pull-off again for 5 weeks. Let me stop the clock here and give you the record, because there is a record, and it is stranger than the stories. Merrill County has courthouse records back to 1844, when the county was formed out of the western end of two older counties. Ashcombe appears in those records in 1851 as a mill site. The land the door stands on was part of a survey patented in 1796 to a man named Josiah Ashcombe. And the survey, you can go look at this, it is on file, it is a matter of public record, describes the tract's northern boundary as running from the chestnut stump on the ridge, thence south 42 degrees, east 190 poles to the door. 1796. A surveyor writing a legal description of a boundary in the year George Washington left office used that door as a corner monument, the way a surveyor uses a rock or a big tree, because it was already there, and it was already so permanent and so well known that a man could put it in a deed and expect his grandchildren to find it. There is no record of anybody building it. There is no tradition of anybody building it, and the Shawnee and the Cherokee, whose ground that was before, have nothing in their recorded oral tradition about it either, but they did not, according to two separate ethnographic collections from the 1890s and the 1920s. Camp in that hollow. Hunt in it, yes. Camp, no. Now here is what happened in 1892, and this is where the tally board starts, and I am going to tell you plainly that this is the only part of this whole case where I think the surviving account may have been improved in the telling. Everything else I have given you I would defend. This part I give you as it is told. In the last week of June, 1892, there was a flood. Kettle Creek came up 11 feet in about 4 hours after a storm that dropped, they said, better than 7 inches on the head of the hollow. It took the mill. It took 2 houses and a barn. It took a footbridge, and it took 11 cattle, and it took a child, a girl of 6 named Nanny Beckett, who was on the porch of one of the houses that went. They found the houses in pieces for 2 miles downstream. They found 9 of the 11 cattle. They did not find the girl. They looked for 4 days. And on the 5th day, the 6th of July, 1892, a man named Preston Hollis Teague, and yes, that is the same family, that is, Hollis Teague's grandfather, came around the bend on the county road at first light, and found the door in the hillside standing open, inward, standing wide. He was 29 years old. He had a wagon and a load of sawn lumber, and he stopped the team in the road, and he sat there. And what he told afterward, and what he told for the rest of his life, and what was written down in 1931 by a WPA folklorist, who is the reason we have any of this. Preston Teague said he could see about 4 feet into it, and no further, and that what he could see was floor. Flat, dressed, dry stone floor, going back into the hill, and that the air coming out of it was cold and smelled like a spring house, and that Nanny Beckett was sitting on that floor about 3 feet in, facing out. He said her dress was dry. Everything in that hollow had been wet for 5 days, and that child's dress was dry. He said he called her name, and she looked at him and did not get up. And he said, and this is the line that got written down in 1931, and that got repeated in that hollow for 80 years, he said. She did not get up because she was waiting to be asked. Preston Teague got down off the wagon. He walked to the steps, and he did not go in, and he did not reach in. And I want you to appreciate what that man did, because he was 29 years old, and there was a lost child 3 feet away from him, and he stood on those steps and did the hardest thing anybody in this story does. He said, Nanny Beckett, will you come out to me? And she got up, and she walked out, and he picked her up, and he carried her to the wagon, and he did not look past her into the dark. And then he came back, and he put his shoulder to that door, and he shut it, because he was 29, and nobody had told him yet. Now, hold on to that. He shut it. That is the exact thing Hollis Teague warned Owen Pruitt never to do 87 years later, and he warned him because his own grandfather did it. Preston Teague lived to be 78. He died in 1941. He ran the store. He married and had 4 children and buried 1. And from the 6th of July, 1892, until the night he died, He never once slept in a room with an unbarred door, and he never once let anyone stand behind him, and every night of his life, according to his son, he counted something out loud before he slept. The child, Nanny Beckett, lived to be 91. She died in 1977 in a nursing home in Elkins, and she remembered nothing of the flood or the door or the 5 days. Nothing at all. She had been examined about it, gently, several times over the years, and there was no gap she could feel. She simply had no memory of being 6 at all, of any of it, and she got a little agitated when pressed, and people stopped pressing. But here is the thing that is in the record, and it is in the record because it was written down by that WPA man in 1931 when Nanny Beckett was 45 years old and living in Ashcombe and perfectly sane. She had a habit. Everyone in town knew it. When she walked into any building, house, store, church, anywhere, Nanny Beckett stopped in the doorway and waited to be invited in. Not from politeness. She physically could not cross a threshold that had not been offered to her. She had been that way since she was 6 years old. She had been to the doctor about it. Her husband, a man named Fields, told the WPA collector that in 20 years of marriage he had said the words, "Come on in," to his own wife, something like 15,000 times, and that he had gotten so used to it, he said it in his sleep. They asked her about it in 1931, and she said, and this was written down, "It is manners. You do not go in where you are not asked, and you do not stand in a door and wait if you can help it, because that is where they can get at you." So, 1892. A door found open, a child inside it dry and waiting, a man who shut it wrong, and a family that has been cutting tally marks into a poplar board behind a stove ever since. That is the town's founding wound. Now let me get back to Owen Pruitt, who at this point in the story knows exactly none of it. The last week of April was quiet. That is how it works, and everybody who has been through one of these will tell you the same, and it is the cruelest part of the design. It gives you a week. It gives you enough calm that a reasonable man starts to rebuild a reasonable explanation, and it lets him get most of the way through building it before it comes back. He got the fence up. He cleaned out the spring house. He put in a garden 40 feet by 60 because it was April and he had been raised to, and his hands wanted something to do that was not a memory. Beans, corn, tomatoes, 2 rows of potatoes. He went to church on the 29th, which he had not done in 3 years, and sat in the back, and about 40 people looked at the back of his head. The preacher was a man named Sanders who drove in from Hendon and served 3 congregations. The sermon was about Lot. Owen noted that a man preaching in Ashcombe chose the text about the 2 angels who came to a door at evening, and the man who begged them not to spend the night in the street, and the crowd outside, and the door. Afterward, on the church steps, Lovey Sizemore took his arm, like she had a right to it, and walked him to his truck again. She said, "You look tired." He said, "I am." She said, "You sleeping with that bar in?" And Owen said, "Every night." And Lovey Sizemore patted his arm and said, "Good boy." 73 years old, telling a 38-year-old man good boy, and he said it was the first time since Ruth died that anybody had said anything to him that felt like a hand on his back. Then she said, "Has it been on the porch yet?" He did not answer for a moment, and she nodded, once, as if he had. She said, "Then you have got about 6 weeks. He said, "6 weeks till what?" And Lovey Sizemore said, "Till it knows what you lost." And she went to her car. 6 weeks from the 29th of April is the 10th of June. Write that down. Or do not, because I am going to remind you. And that same week, on Tuesday the 1st of May, Owen Pruitt went up into the loft to see about the corn. There was still corn up there. Ear corn, 4 or 5 bushels of it, from some year in the 1960s, dry as paper and mostly eaten out by mice. He had been putting off dealing with it. He went up with a scoop shovel and a feed sack and started moving it, and at the bottom of the pile, up against the north gable, where the roof comes down to the floor, the shovel hit something that was not corn. It was a box. Poplar, dovetailed, about the size of a bread box, with a lid on wire hinges and a hasp with no lock. And on the lid, burned in with a poker, in letters about 1.5 inches high, was a name. I. Pell. That box is the reason we know anything at all about what is behind that door, and about what happened in the winter of 1937, and about why there is a keyhole. And Owen Pruitt sat down on his heels in a hot loft with dust in the light, and lifted the lid, and found 140 pages of another man's handwriting. And I am going to read you a great deal of it, but not yet. Because before I do, you need to know who Isaac Pell was, and what he was doing in that hollow, and how he came to be in a position to write down what he wrote down. And you need to know one more thing about that box, which is the thing that made Owen Pruitt's hands go unsteady before he ever opened it. The box had been nailed shut. There were 8 nails around the lid, driven in and clenched over, and somebody had pulled every one of them out from the inside. I will explain what I mean by that, because it sounds like a figure of speech, and it is not. When you nail a box lid down and clench the nails, the point of the nail comes through the inside of the wood, and you bend it over flat against the grain, so it cannot back out. To open that box you have to either pry the lid and tear the wood, or go inside somehow and straighten 8 clenched points and push each nail back out through its hole. The lid of that box was not pried. The wood was not torn. All 8 nails were lying loose in the bottom of the box, and all 8 of them were straightened, and around all 8 holes on the underside of the lid the wood fibers were pushed up and outward, the way wood does when something comes through it from the other side. Owen Pruitt had been a mason for 20 years and had opened 10,000 crates, and he sat on his heels in that loft and turned that lid over in his hands twice, and then set it down and did not pick it up again for 2 days. Now, Isaac Pell. In September of 1936, the Works Progress Administration authorized a survey of the Merrill County road system, part of a much larger program that put engineers and rodmen into every hollow in that state between 1935 and 1940. The goal in Ashcombe was specific: to reroute the county road away from the base of Coldwater Knob, where the hillside had slid twice, and to run it instead across the creek bottom on a new grade. The proposed new alignment would have taken the road about 400 feet south of where it runs now. It would have moved traffic away from the door. Isaac Pell was the party chief. He was 34 years old, from Bellaire, Ohio, a graduate of the engineering program at Ohio University, class of 1925, married, no children, and by all accounts, an intelligent, sour, precise, and thoroughly unimaginative man, which is the best possible witness a story like this can have. He and a 3-man crew came into Ashcombe on the 28th of September, 1936. Pell boarded with the Pruitt family in that same 4-room house on Bickle Road because Owen's grandmother took boarders and there was no other place. He stayed, off and on, for 14 months. He kept a field journal because that was the job a surveyor keeps notes, and his notes are legal documents. But he also kept a second book, a personal one, and it is the second one that was in that poplar box, and it runs from the 9th of October, 1936, to the 11th of January, 1938. I am going to read from it. I have edited only for length. The voice is his. The first entry is about the weather and the crew, and it is not interesting, so I will start at the third, dated the 22nd of October, 1936. Ran the preliminary line today from Sta. 40 through Sta. 68, east of town. The line as staked passes within 31 feet of the stone doorway in the north bank. I noted this in the field book as an obstruction, meaning only that we will want to check the bank for stability there, as one does with any masonry near a cut. Mrs. Pruitt asked me at supper what I had written about it. I told her. She put down the dish she was drying and left the room and did not come back to it. Her husband told me afterward, apologetically, that the door is a local matter and that I would do well to leave it out of my notes. I asked whether he meant that seriously. He said that he did. I have been in 11 counties in 3 states doing this work, and I have been warned off of family graveyards, off of a still, and once off a bear. This is the first time I have been warned off of a door. Second entry, 2nd of November, sir. Dressel and Kimbrough ran levels along the north bank today. I took the opportunity to examine the door. Notes as follows. Frame, dressed stone, 5 pieces, 2 jambs, lintel, sill, and a relieving stone above. Joints dry laid, extremely fine, no mortar detectable. I could not insert the corner of a field book page at any joint. Stone appears to be a fine-grained sandstone or quartzite, distinctly different from the local shale. Nearest source of comparable material, per the State Geological Survey, is in excess of 90 miles. Door. White oak, 5 planks, hand-wrought straps and clenched nails. Hardware has been renewed at least twice. Wood is extremely weathered but sound. No handle, latch, or ring on the exterior face. A rectangular slot, 1-to-1, 2 inches, by 2 inches. In the left-hand third, 34 inches, above sill, with no wear whatever at its margins. Opening. The door is hung to swing inward. I confirm this by examining the rebate, which is cut on the inner face of the jambs, and by the position of the straps. I put my shoulder against it, gently, out of curiosity. It did not move. I did not press hard, as Dressel was watching, and I did not care to look foolish. 2 observations I will put down and not repeat. First, the sill stone is worn dished, near an inch deep at the center, and that wear is on the outside of the sill only. Whatever has passed over that stone, in numbers sufficient to wear, it has been standing outside it, not coming out of it. Second, the door is cold. This is not remarkable in itself, as stone and shaded oak will hold cold. But I put a thermometer against the wood for 10 minutes at 2 p.m., air temperature 58, full sun on the face of the bank for the preceding 2 hours. The wood read 39. Third entry, 9th of November, and here the tone begins to change. A curious conversation. An old woman named Tildy Cobb walked out from town this afternoon, a distance I would put at better than a mile, and stood in the road until I came down off the bank. She asked whether it was true we intended to move the road. I said it was, and explained the reasoning, which is the slide at Sta 52, and which is sound. She asked how far from the door the new road would run. I said about 400 feet. She said, and I am setting this down word for word because it was said with such total composure that I have not been able to stop turning it over. Then, in about 40 years, you will have a road that nobody watches, and a door that nobody watches, and a thing that has got used to being watched. Mister, that hill has had a road in front of it since before there was a state here, and a path before that, and it has had eyes on it every day of every one of those years, and I would not care to be the man who takes the eyes away. I said, not unkindly, that I did not think a road could be said to watch anything, and she said, it ain't the road, it's the people on it. I said, and what happens if nobody is watching? And she said, it gets to work. She then thanked me for my time, quite courteously, and walked the mile back to town. I offered her a ride in the truck, and she declined, and I noticed that she walked in the middle of the road and not on the shoulder, and that she looked at the bank the entire way past it, walking sideways for about 100 feet, like a woman crossing in front of a chained dog. Fourth entry, the 27th of November, 1936. This is the one where a reasonable man begins to have a problem. We have lost the line. I set the P. I at stay. 52 on the 14th with a 2 inches. By 2 inches, hub-driven flush and attack, guard stake alongside, and a reference tie to 2 points. The northeast corner of the Sizemore spring house and a drill hole I made myself in the ledge across the creek. Standard practice. I have set 4,000 hubs in my career. On the 23rd we returned to run the curve, and the hub was not there. Not pulled, not broken, the ground was undisturbed. The guard stake was standing. The tie distances taped from the springhouse corner and from the drill hole both put the point 22 feet north of where it should be, in the middle of the bank. I assumed error. We reset. On the 25th, I checked it myself and it was correct. Today, the 27th, we taped it again and it is 22 feet north. 22 feet north of Sta. 52, at the elevation of the road, is the doorway. I do not have an explanation, and I dislike writing that sentence. I have considered. Taping error, no. 3 men, 2 tapes, temperature corrected. Transit error, no. I checked the plate bubbles and shot a check angle. Tampering, no. The ground is undisturbed, and a man cannot move a hub 22 feet without moving dirt. And my own error, possible in principle, not 3 times in the same direction by the same amount. Kimbrough asked me tonight whether we were going to move the road. I said that was the job. He said, "It don't seem to want to move." I told him that a hill does not want anything. He said, "I never said hill." I want to pause on that, because there is something in it that people miss. Isaac Pell was not writing this for anybody. This was his private book. He had no audience to impress and no story to sell and nothing whatsoever to gain by inventing a moving survey hub. He was a federal employee with a schedule and a payroll, and every one of these entries is, functionally, a man documenting the reasons his project was falling behind in a book he intended nobody to ever read. And it gets worse in December. And in December he meets the woman who is Orlean Cobb's great-aunt. And he writes down the cosmology in a form nobody in that hollow would have said out loud to a native, because he was not a native, and there is a thing about people in those mountains that everybody outside gets exactly backwards. They will not tell their own, but they will tell a stranger who is leaving, because a stranger who is leaving is a way to put a thing down. 5th entry, the 14th of December, 1936. Snow since Friday, 11 inches at the house. More on the ridge. Field work suspended. I have spent 3 days at the kitchen table computing curve data and being fed by Mrs. Pruitt, who has decided, I think, that I am not going to be talked out of the road and has settled into being kind to me instead, which is worse. Her boy Dellis, who is 38 and lives here, took me up on the ridge yesterday to show me the old grade of the 1890s tram road which I had asked about. On the way down he stopped at a place where you can see the county road below and the bank where the door is, and he said, without any preamble at all, "You want to know about it or not?" I said I did. He said his grandmother's people had the keeping of it once, and that it went to the Cobbs when his grandmother's sister married out. He said there is a book, he called it The Tally, but from the way he described it, I believe he means the cutboard in Teague's store, together with something written, because he referred to the names, and that a person in this hollow is appointed to keep it, and does not choose it, and cannot put it down. I asked what the tally counts. He said, "Askings." I asked him what that meant, and he would not say, and we walked the rest of the way down without speaking, and at the bottom he said one more thing. He said, "Mr. Pell, if you move that road, be somewhere else when you do it." 6th entry, the 22nd of December. Went to see Tildy Cobb at her house on the Mullins Branch, on Dellis Pruitt's advice, and against my own better judgment. She is 81, and lives alone in a 2-room house with salt in the sills of both doors, renewed, she said, every spring since before her mother's time. I asked her plainly what the door is. I am going to set down what she said as nearly word for word as I can manage, because she said it slowly and in an order, as if she had said it before, which I suppose she had. She said, "Some ground is thick. You can dig in it, build on it, bury in it, and it stays where you put it. Most ground is thick, and some ground is thin, not weak thin, like a place in a coat that is wore down and you can see light through it if you hold it up. There is thin ground in every county in this world, and mostly it don't signify, because a thin place with nothing on the far side of it is just a thin place." I asked what is on the far side of this one. She said, "Something that keeps." I said that was not an answer, and she agreed that it was not, and said she did not have a better one and that anybody who gave me a better one was making it up. She said, "What I can tell you is its manners. It has got manners, and the manners are the whole of it. It cannot take, it has never taken one soul out of this hollow in 200 years, and it never will. It has to be let. It has to be asked, or it has to be answered, or it has to be give something. That is why the door opens the way it does. A door that opens in is a door that has to be pulled from the far side, and it cannot be pulled from the far side unless somebody on this side puts their hand to it first and gives it the start." I said, "Then why is there a door at all? If it cannot come out, why should anyone have trouble to build one?" And the old woman looked at me for a while and said, "Who told you the door was built to keep it in?" I said I had assumed. She said, "A door in a hill with no house behind it and no handle on the outside and a hole for a key that nobody has got. Mister, that ain't a lid. That's a mouth with manners taught to it. Somebody a long time ago found a thin place in that hill and they could not close it, so they framed it. They put a door on it and they put a rule on the door, and the rule is that it has to ask. That is all a door is. A door is a rule about coming in." I asked her then the question I had come to ask, which is whether she believed the road ought to be moved. She said, "It don't matter what I believe. You will move it or you won't. But I will tell you what I told the last one that come out here with a transit in 1911, and he did not move his road either. There is 3 things that keep that door shut. The first is that it has got to be asked, and most people have got the sense not to ask. The second is that somebody in this hollow has always kept the count, so that when it does get one, everybody knows the price, and nobody talks themselves into thinking it was a bear or a drowning. And the third," and here she stopped, and she got up and put a stick of wood in the stove and sat back down and said, "The third is that there is something in that hill on the far side of that door holding it shut, and it has been holding it a long time, and it is getting tired." I asked her what she meant by that. She said, "It used to be 100 years between, then it was 50. My mother seen 2. I have seen 4. I told her, as gently as I could, that she was describing a folk belief and not a mechanism, and she said, "I know it. You asked me what it is. I told you I don't know what it is. I know what it does, and I know what it costs, and I know that when I am dead somebody else will have to know it, and I have been 40 years trying to find out who, and I ain't found them yet, and that frightens me a great deal more than the door does. I walked home 4 miles in the snow, and I did not think about the road one time." Now, before I read you the rest of that journal, and there is a great deal more of it, and it goes to a very dark place, I am going to step out of the story for exactly 4 sentences. If this is the kind of case you would sit with for 10 hours instead of 3, the collection is called What the Hollow Keeps, 12 files, 4 states, all of them told out at this length and this pace. Link is in the description and pinned in the comments. And tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and whether there is a place in your county that people go around instead of through. Now then, back to Isaac Pell in January of 1937, when the crew came back to work. 7th entry. The 11th of January, 1937. Resumed. Reset the P.I. at sta. 52 on Monday. It held Tuesday. It held Wednesday. It was 22 feet north on Thursday. I have stopped writing this in the field book. I put it in the field book twice, and both times I sat looking at my own handwriting afterward and understanding exactly how it would read to the district engineer. So it goes in here now. Dressel has quit. He gave notice on the 6th and was gone the 7th. He did not give a reason that I could put in a letter. What he actually said, on the porch, with his bag in his hand, was, "Mr. Pell, I have been on the flagging end of that line for 3 months, and every time I turn my back on that bank, I can feel it the way you feel a man behind you in a line at a window." I told him I would give him a good character. He said, "Do something for me instead. Don't holler my name up that hollow after dark. Not for a joke. Not for nothing." I said I had no intention of hollering anything at anybody, and he said, "You will. When it gets going, you will want to know if it is a person, and you will call out. Everybody calls out. Just don't use a name." 8th entry, the 2nd of February, 1937. I am going to write this down carefully. Last night at approximately 11 o'clock, I was awake in the loft room at the Pruitts, clear, cold, no wind, snow on the ground, moon near full. I mention the moon because the visibility was very good, and I want that understood. I heard a voice from the direction of the pasture say my name. It said Isaac. One time. My wife calls me Isaac. My mother called me Isaac. On this job I am Mr. Pell to the crew, and Mr. to the town, and Pell to the district office. There is not a living person within 110 miles of this house who calls me Isaac. It was her voice. I am not going to embellish that. It was Esther's voice, and Esther is in Bellaire, Ohio, and I had a letter from her on Saturday. I got up and went to the window. The pasture was under snow, bright as a table under that moon, and I could see the whole of it clean to the woods, and there was nothing standing in it, and there were no tracks in it. And it did not say it again. That is the part I keep coming back to. I stood at that window better than 20 minutes. Anyone who has ever called to a house and got no answer calls again. It did not call again. It said the name once, into the cold, and then it waited, and the waiting was the loudest thing I have ever stood in. I did not answer. Downstairs I heard the old woman get up and put the bar in the front door, and then, after a moment, put the bar in the kitchen door, and then go back to bed. She never said a word to me about it, that night or since. 9th entry, the 28th of February. Twice more this month, both times my name, once, and both times in a voice I know. The second time was my father, who has been dead since 1929. I have begun to understand the shape of it, and I dislike the shape. It does not know me. I am satisfied of that. It knows what I miss. Those are different things, and it is working with the second one because the second one is easier to come by. A man carries what he misses on the outside of him. It is in how he holds his mouth when a certain thing is mentioned. Anything that watched me for 4 months would have it. What I cannot work out is why the single call. If the object is to draw a man out, call twice, call 10 times, call the way a person calls. The single call is worse for its purpose. It is the very thing that stopped me at the window. Unless the single call is not for drawing a man out, unless the rule is that it may only ask once, and it is obliged to, and it does, and then it waits, because it has to. If that is so, then this is not a hunt. It is a formality. And I have spent 4 months treating a formality as a hunt, and the crew has treated it as a hunt, and old Tildy Cobb told me plainly in December that it was a formality, and I wrote her down as a folk belief. A door is a rule about coming in. She said that in December, and I have thought about it every day since. 10th entry, the 19th of March, 1937. And this is the one that Owen Pruitt read 4 times, sitting on the floor of that loft, with his back against the chimney. Kimbrough knocked on the door. I want to record this accurately, because I am the only person who saw it, and because I am partly to blame. We were finishing the topography along the bank. It was the end of the day, near 5, and the light was going, and Kimbrough had been out of temper all week over the hub business, which he does not believe in, and which he therefore resents having to accommodate. He came down off the bank past the doorway, and he said something to the effect of, "Well, let's just ask it to move over." And he went up the 3 stones, and he knocked on that door with his knuckles. 3 times, ordinary knocks. The sort of knock you give a screen door. Nothing happened. He came back down laughing, and I laughed too. God help me, because it was a relief, and we picked up the instrument and went home and had supper. At about 8 that evening the Pruitt boy came out to the shed where I was cleaning the transit and said there was a man in the road. There was. Kimbrough was standing in the middle of the county road in front of the house, in his shirt sleeves, in March, at 8 at night, facing east. Facing toward the bend, I went out to him and put my hand on his shoulder, and he was cold as a fence rail, and he said, without turning his head, "It answered." I asked him what he meant. He said, "It knocked back. Not then. Just now. On the wall by my bed. 3. I got him inside." Mrs. Pruitt put a quilt on him and did not ask a single question, which told me she had done this before. And old Dellis went out and barred both doors, and then, and I have not been able to shake this, he went around the inside of the house and knocked once on each of the 4 walls of the room where we had put Kimbrough, and said something under his breath at each one, and I did not catch it, and I did not ask. Kimbrough was all right in the morning. He was all right for 9 days. On the 28th of March he walked off the job at about 2 in the afternoon, in front of me and in front of the rodman, without a word, and went down the bank and stood in the road and looked east for about a minute, and then came back and picked up the rod and finished the day. He does not remember doing it. He is not lying. I have watched a man lie, and I have watched a man be told he did a thing he has no memory of, and they do not look the same. Tildy Cobb sent word for me to bring him out. I did. She sat him at her table, and she took his hands, and she said, "Son, when it knocked back, did you count it?" He said he did. 3. And she said, "Then it is 3." And she went and got a knife and a poplar board out of a cupboard, and she cut 3 marks in it while we sat there. And I asked her what the marks were for, and she said, "So it can't be more than 3. I said, "Does the board hold it to 3? And she said, "The board don't hold nothing. I hold it to 3. The board is so that when I am dead somebody else can hold it to 3. So the tally is not a record of what has happened, or not only, it is a record of what has been agreed to. A ledger, every mark, is an amount someone has acknowledged owing, and the acknowledging is what keeps the amount from growing." I asked her what happens to Kimbrough. She said, 3 of something, might be 3 nights, might be 3 years, might be 3 times he don't remember. He answered a door he had no business at, and the door answered back, and the count is 3. If he leaves this hollow and does not come back and does not call out to it, 3 is a small price, and he will be an old man before he understands he paid it. Kimbrough left on the 4th of April. I gave him a good character. He shook my hand and he said, "Mr. Pell, don't finish it." I asked him what he meant, and he said he did not know why he had said it, and got on the bus. 11th entry, the 2nd of August, 1937. There is a gap of 4 months before this one, and the handwriting changes. It gets smaller and more careful, the way handwriting does when a man is trying to hold something steady. The project is dead. Word came down on the 28th of July. The realignment is deferred indefinitely. Funds reallocated to the Bland County work. I am to close out the survey, file the plats, and report to Charleston in October. I am aware of how this will read. It reads as a budget decision, and it is one. $4,000 of the appropriation went east, and our project was the one that had fallen behind, and it had fallen behind because of me, and it had fallen behind because a hub would not stay where I put it. The road will not move. In 40 years someone will look at these plats in a file drawer and see a perfectly ordinary alignment that was never built for perfectly ordinary reasons, and they will not know that a woman told me in December of '36 exactly what would happen and why. I have not slept properly since March. It calls once, most weeks now, sometimes twice in a night, but never twice together, always separated by hours, and always a different voice, and always the one name I have got, so I can be in bed and hear it and lie still and go back to sleep, which I would not have believed of myself in November. But here is what has changed, and it is why I have started writing in this book again after 4 months of not being able to look at it. Last Tuesday, it did not use a voice I know. It used mine. I heard my own voice from the pasture say Isaac 1 time in my own voice as I hear it in my own head, which is not how anyone else hears it, and I want you to understand what that means. It does not mean it is mocking me. It means it has run out. It has used my wife and my father and my brother and a man I worked with in 1928, and it has come to the end of the people I miss, and the last one on that list is the man I used to be. It has been going through me like a drawer, and when it is finished with the drawer, I do not know what it does. 12th entry, the 14th of November, 1937. He did not report to Charleston in October. Nobody in the district office seems to have chased it very hard, and there is a personnel note in the file, dated the 9th of November, that says only, Pell I, on leave, unpaid, at own request. I have moved into the loft room permanently, and I have got the old woman's boy to put brackets and a bar on the loft door, which he did without asking me why, and I have salt in the sill. I stayed because of the keyhole. I am going to set out my reasoning while I still trust it. There is a slot in that door, 1.5 inches by 1/2 inch, 34 inches above the sill. It has no wear at its margins. In 200 years, and it is more than 200, it is in the 1796 survey as a monument no key has ever been turned in it, because if a key had ever been turned in it, there would be wear, and there is none, not a scratch, and I have been over it 4 times with a glass. Nobody has ever had the key. Everyone in this hollow says so, cheerfully, as though it were a comfort. But consider, why cut a keyhole in a door and then never make a key? And the answer, which came to me in September, and which I have not been able to get rid of since, is that it is not a keyhole. It is the wrong shape, and it is in the wrong place. It is too low for a lock on a door of that height. A lock plate would sit at 40 inches, not 34. 34 inches is the height of a child's face. 34 inches is the height of a kneeling man's mouth. It is not for a key. It is for a word. It is a slot for speaking through, cut low, so that whoever speaks through it must first get down on their knees. And if I am right about that, then everything that woman told me is not folklore, it is procedure. The thing behind that door has to be asked. There is a place provided for the asking. There is a posture required for the asking. Somebody, at some time, built a formal apparatus for a transaction, and this whole hollow has spent 200 years teaching its children not to use it, and has forgotten that it is a thing that can be used. Which raises the question that has kept me here, unpaid, in a loft, in November, with a bar on my door. If the door can be asked to open, can it be asked to stay shut? If the slot works both ways, if a man can put his mouth to it and say a thing and be heard, then there has never in 200 years been anyone on this side who tried to negotiate. Every account is of people refusing to speak. Every rule in this hollow is a rule of silence. And silence is not a negotiation, it is a stall. And Tildy Cobb told me in December that the one holding it shut on the far side is getting tired. I am going to go and speak to it. I have set my affairs in order, such as they are. Esther has money enough. I have written her a letter, which the Pruitt boy will post. I am not a brave man. I want that on the record. I am a stubborn one, and I have spent 14 months being told by everybody in this hollow that the right response to a door is to never go near it, and it seems to me that in 14 months nobody has once considered that a door with a speaking slot and a rule about asking is a door somebody meant to be talked to. I will go on the morning of the 12th of January, when the road is empty and the light is good. I will kneel at the slot. I will not knock. I will not touch the door. I will say only this: I am not asking to come in, and I am not asking you to come out. I am asking what it would take, and that is the last line. Not the last line of the entry, the last line of the book. It stops there, mid-sentence, at the bottom of a page, and the remaining 40 pages of that journal are blank. The entry is dated the 14th of November, 1937. The box lid was burned with his name, and the first page of the journal, the front paste down, which Owen did not turn back and look at until his third reading, has a single line on it, written in a different, harder hand, pressed so hard the pen went through the paper. It says, "Do not do what I did. It is not the door that asks. The date under that line is the 11th of January, 1938. The day before he went. And I have looked. There is no record of Isaac Pell after the 11th of January, 1938. He does not report to Charleston. He does not go home to Belair. His wife, Esther Pell, wrote 4 letters to the district office in 1938 and 1939, which are in the file, and which are the worst thing in this entire case, and which I am not going to read to you. In 1945 she petitioned to have him declared dead. It was granted in 1946, and that poplar box sat in the loft of a house on Bickle Road under 4 bushels of corn for 41 years, nailed shut with 8 clenched nails until every one of those nails came out from the inside. Owen Pruitt read that journal over 3 days, the 1st through the 3rd of May, 1979, and on the 4th of May he did something I want to give him credit for because most people do not. He wrote it down. He went to Hendon, and he bought 2 composition books and a box of pencils, and he came home and he started a record. Date, time, weather, what happened, what he had done about it. He went back and reconstructed everything from the 9th of April, the tree line, the lamps, the stairs, the barn corner, the footprints, the porch, the door. He was a tradesman, and he did it the way a tradesman does a takeoff. Measurements, quantities, no adjectives. That composition book is the reason this case exists in the form it does. Because a man who is being haunted and who writes down the times will eventually see the thing that a man who is only being frightened never sees. Here is what Owen Pruitt saw on the 9th of May when he sat down and looked at 3.5 weeks of his own handwriting. Every incident had happened on a night when he had thought about Ruth. Not every night he thought about Ruth had an incident, but every incident night was a Ruth night. He had, without meaning to, been noting it because when you write down "could not sleep," you tend to write down why, and there it was, in his own pencil, 7 times out of 7. The 16th of April, the lamps. He had found her handwriting on the back of an envelope in his toolbox that afternoon, a grocery list, and had sat in the barn with it for an hour. The 18th, the lamps again. He had dreamed about the kitchen on Dearborn Avenue. The 20th, he had been humming, and had caught himself humming off key, the way she did, and had stopped in the middle of the pasture with a fence tool in his hand and been unable to move for about a minute. The 21st, the footprints and the porch. He had spent the whole of that day thinking about her because the 21st of April was her birthday. He put the pencil down, and he went out on the porch, and he sat on the steps in the dark. And he understood, correctly, and about 6 weeks before anybody told him that the thing on that hill was not following him. It was reading him. Lovey Sizemore had said 6 weeks. She said it on the 29th of April. 6 weeks from the 29th of April is the 10th of June, and I told you to keep that date. On the 19th of May, Owen Pruitt walked down to Teague's store and asked Hollis Teague where Orlean Cobb lived, and Hollis Teague looked at him for a long moment, and then drew him a map on the back of a feed receipt. He did not ask why. That is the thing about that hollow that I want you to have a feel for by now. Hollis Teague had said 3 things and answered 1 question and told the man he would not speak of it again, and he kept that word for 7 weeks. But when Owen came in and asked for Orlean, Hollis drew the map, because in Ashcombe, a man asking for Orlean Cobb was a man reporting a fire. Her house was on the Mullins Branch, 2 miles up a track that Owen had to walk the last half mile of. 2 rooms, plus a lean-to kitchen added sometime in the 40s. Tin roof, a porch with 2 chairs, chickens, a garden laid out in rows so straight he stopped to look at them, and salt in the sill of both doors, white and fresh, renewed that spring, as it had been renewed every spring since before the state of West Virginia existed. She was 88 years old. She was small and dry and upright, with her hair still mostly dark, in a house dress and a man's cardigan and rubber boots. And she was on the porch when he came up the last of the track, and she had 2 cups of coffee already poured. 2. He got up on the porch, and she said, "Sit down, Ida's boy." He sat. She said, "You found Pell's book." He said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "I have been waiting on that book for 41 years. Dellis would never say where he put it. I asked him 100 times." And she took a drink of her coffee and said, "Stubborn Pruitts, the whole line of you." Now, I am going to give you what Orlean Cobb told Owen Pruitt on the 19th of May, 1979, and I am going to give it to you close to whole, because it is the center of this case, and because it is the only complete statement of that Hollow's belief that anybody ever wrote down. She said, "First thing, you want to know what it is. I ain't going to tell you, and not because it is a secret. My Aunt Tildy told a government man in 1936 that she did not know, and he wrote her down like she was being coy. She was not being coy. Nobody knows. What we have got is the manners of it, and the manners is everything, so you listen to the manners and let the rest go." She said, "Some ground is thick, and some ground is thin. That hill is thin. It has been thin since before anybody was here to say so. And on the far side of thin ground, there is sometimes nothing and sometimes something, and here there is something, and what it is a thing that keeps. It keeps what it gets. It don't eat it, and it don't use it, and it don't let it go. It keeps it." He asked her what that meant. And Orlean Cobb said, "Nanny Beckett sat on that floor in 1892 for 5 days, and come out with her dress dry and no memory of being a child. It did not hurt her. It kept her, and when Preston Teague asked her out, she come out, because it has got to give a thing back if it is asked for right. But it had already had 5 days of her, and it never give them back, and she died at 91 still missing them." She said, "It cannot take. Write that on your hand. In all the years and all the count, it has never once taken. It has to be let. And there is 3 ways to let it, and every soul this hollow has lost went by one of the 3, and there ain't a 4th. And here are the 3 ways, in the words of an 88-year-old woman on a porch on the Mullins branch, and this is the closest thing that Hollow has to Scripture. The first way is you knock. You put your hand on that door, and you make a sound at it, and that is you speaking first. It never has to answer a knock, and mostly it don't. But if it does, and you will know, because it comes back to you 3 nights later on the wall by your bed, or on your own front door, or on the floor under your feet, then you have got a count, and the count is however many times you knocked, and you owe it that many of something, and you do not get to pick what. The second way is you answer. It will say your name off that hill, one time, in a voice you would get up out of bed for. If you say anything back, if you say who is it, if you say her name, if you say I am here, then you have answered a thing that called you, and there is no undoing that. That is not a knock. That is a conversation, and a conversation has got 2 ends, and now it has got a hold of yours. And the third way is you go to it, and you ask it for something. And that, son, is the bad one. Because the first 2 a fool does by accident. The third one you do on purpose, and the ones that do it are never fools. They are always smart, and they are always grieving, and they always think they have found a door in the rules that nobody else looked at. Your Mr. Pell went and knelt down at that slot, and he asked it what it would take. Owen said, "And what did it take?" And Orlean Cobb said, "Him." It took the man who asked what it would take. That was the answer to his question, and he got it in full. She got up then and went in the house and came back out with something wrapped in oilcloth, and she put it on the little table between the chairs and unwrapped it. It was a ledger, a real one, a bound account book, the kind a store keeps, with a marbled cover and a red spine, and it was so full that the block of it had swollen and the boards would not shut flat. She said, "The board in Hollis's store is the count. This here is the names." She opened it. She let him look. Column 1, a date. Column 2, a name. Column 3, 1 word, in a hand that changed maybe 9 or 10 times over the length of the book as the keeping passed from one person to the next. The 1 word was, in every case, one of 3. Knocked, answered, asked. The first entry was dated 1788, and Owen Pruitt turned the pages of a 200-year-old ledger on a porch on a May afternoon and understood the thing I told you at the beginning, that nobody guesses right. The tally board in Teague's store does not count the dead. It counts the ones who let it in. 51 marks on the new board, 400 and some on the old one. And when he looked up, Orlean Cobb was watching his face, and she said, "Now you have got it." He said, 51. Since when? She said, since 1931, when my aunt started the new board. 51 since 31. In 200 year before that there was 411, which is about 2 a year, and if you sit down with a pencil like I did in 1950, you will find the first 100 year is thin, and the second is thicker, and the last 50 year is thicker still. And there is 109 people left in this hollow to knock on it, where there was 600 when I was a girl. She said, fewer people, more marks. And then she said the 11 words that made Owen Pruitt get up and go stand in her yard for a minute. She said, "It ain't getting hungrier, son. The one holding it is getting weaker." When he came back and sat down, she poured him more coffee, and then she gave him the rules. There are 5 of them. Hollis Teague had given him 3, badly, at a counter, in a hurry, the way a man passes along something he half wishes he did not have to carry. Orlean Cobb gave him 5, in order, slowly, and made him say them back. 1. Bar your door at dusk, not at bedtime. Dusk. There is a difference, and the difference has killed people. A man who bars at bedtime has an hour or 2 every evening where the door is shut but not held. And it can tell. It can always tell. Bar it when the light goes, and don't lift it again till the light comes. And if that means you go without the outhouse, then you go without. 2. When it calls your name, and it will call your name, you do not answer, and you do not stay quiet either. He stopped her there. He said, "Ma'am?" And she said, everybody gets that part wrong, and Hollis gets it wrong worse than anybody because his people have been getting it wrong since 1892. Silence is not safe. Silence is a room with nothing in it, and it will come and stand in that room. What you do is you make a noise that ain't an answer. You count. Out loud. Numbers. Not a prayer. A prayer has got a U in it, and it can stand in a U. Not a song, because a song has got words, and words can be taken up and give back to you in a voice you love. Numbers. Numbers don't mean nothing, and don't point at nobody and cannot be answered, and so long as you are saying numbers out loud, the room you are in has got a person in it, and there is no place for it to stand. 3. And this is the one my aunt made me say back to her every night for a month when I was 9 years old, and it is the one you are going to want to argue with. When you count, get 1 wrong. Owen Pruitt said he sat there on that porch and could not get his breath for a second, because his wife counted stairs out loud and always, on purpose every time, got 1 wrong. 15 years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. If you count a thing right, you have finished with it. I like to leave a little unfinished. He said, "Why?" And Orlean Cobb said, "Because a true count is a thing that can be finished, and when you finish it, there is a quiet at the end of it, and the quiet at the end of a finished thing is a door. You count to 100 true and get to 100 and stop, and for about a half a second there is a shape in the room where the counting was, and it is a shape with an end on it, and that is enough. A wrong count don't finish. You get 1 wrong, and the count is spoiled, and it don't close. There ain't no door in it. My aunt used to say, 'Don't ever hand it a whole thing.' She said, 'That is why the marks in Hollis's store is cut and not wrote. A wrote number is a whole thing. 411, wrote down, is a sum. Cut marks ain't a sum. They are 411 separate little acts of somebody remembering, every one of them cut by hand, one at a time, by somebody who had to sit down and do it. You cannot add up a tally board without touching every mark on it. There ain't no shortcut in it, and there ain't no total at the bottom of it. It don't close either." Owen said, "And rule 4? She said, 4. If it comes wearing somebody, look at what it got wrong. It will get something wrong. It always gets something wrong, and it is never the big thing, it is always the little one, because the little ones is what nobody says out loud, and so it cannot get at them. You will see her walk, and you will hear her call, and you will see the dress and the hair, and every bit of it will be right. Find the one that ain't, and when you find it, say it out loud. Say the wrong thing out loud, to its face. It does not like to be corrected. It cannot argue, and it cannot mend it, because the mending would have to come out of a place it ain't got access to. And then she said, 5. And 5 ain't a rule. It is a fact. And I am giving it to you, because if I do not give it to you, you will find it out on a night when you cannot afford to be surprised. The counting works, but it costs. Every man and woman I ever knew that used it the rest of their life. It gets in. You will count going upstairs. You will count the fence posts on a road. You will count out loud in a bed in a town 400 miles from here, with your wife shaking you and asking what in the world. My Aunt Tildy counted to 200 every night of her life from 1911 till she died, and she could not stop and did not try. You do not get to put it down after. Nobody gets to put it down after. That is the price of the only thing that works. Owen said, "Ma'am, if I get in that truck tomorrow and go back to Charleston and never come back, is it done?" And Orlean Cobb said, "Have you answered it?" He said, "No." She said, "Have you knocked?" He said, "No, ma'am, not since I was 11 years old." And the old woman went very still. She said, "Say that again." He said, "In 1952, on a dare, I slapped it with my hand and run." She said, "How many times?" And Owen Pruitt said, "Once." You know, there is a version of this story where that is the whole of it, where the count is 1 and 1 is nothing, and he goes home. That is not this story, but I want you to sit for a second in the place where he sat, because for about 4 seconds on that porch he thought it might be. Orlean Cobb got up. She went in the house. She was gone a good while, long enough that he got up and looked at the garden. When she came back she had the ledger, and it was open, and she put it down in front of him with her finger on a line. The date was the 9th of August, 1952. The name was Owen Dellis Pruitt, and the word in the 3rd column was knocked, and beside it in the margin, in a woman's hand in pencil, faded, was the number 1, and under the number 1, a second entry in the same hand and darker pencil, dated 3 days later, the 12th of August, 1952, answered back. 1. He said, "It knocked back?" She said, "Your mother come to my aunt on the 12th of August, 1952, and said there had been one knock on the wall over your bed at about 11 o'clock the night before, and that you had slept through it, and she had not." He said, "She never told me." Orlean Cobb said, "She took a switch to you, and she took you to church, and she got you out of this hollow at 19, and she never let you come back for a visit longer than a day. What do you reckon that was?" And she closed the ledger, and she said, "You have owed it one since you was 11 years old, Owen Pruitt, and it has waited 27 year for a time when you would be worth collecting, and then your wife died, and here you come up that road with a truckload of tools and a hole in you the size of a woman, and I want you to think real hard about who it was. Put the notion in your head to take a house you did not want in a town you had run away from." I have thought about that line for a long time, because there is a version of this where that is just an old woman being ominous. And there is another version where a 38-year-old stonemason in a rented room in Charleston in February of 1979 read a lawyer's letter and could not, then or ever, explain to a single living person why he decided to go. Owen walked back down the Mullins branch that evening. It was near dark when he got to Bickle Road. He barred the door at dusk, the way she said, and he did not sleep much, and nothing came. The next 11 days were the worst kind of quiet. He worked the garden. He replaced 2 sills in the barn. He drove to Hendon twice. And every evening at dusk he barred the door, and every night he lay in the dark and waited, and nothing came, and the not coming got into him worse than anything that had happened yet. He wrote in the composition book on the 28th of May, 11 days. Nothing. Have caught myself twice hoping for it. That is how it does it. It is not trying to scare me. It is trying to make me lonesome for it. And then on the 29th of May, at about 4 in the afternoon, in broad daylight, he came out of the barn and looked up at the tree line, and there was a woman standing at the top of the pasture, 440 feet. He paced it off the next morning, 440 feet, up the slope, at the edge of the trees, in full sun. She was wearing a yellow dress. Ruth Pruitt owned a yellow dress. She was buried in a blue one, because her sister picked it, and Owen had been too far under to argue and had regretted it for 18 months, because the yellow was the one she wore in the summer, the one she had on the day at Indian Lake in 1971, when she laughed so hard at something, he said that she had to sit down in the sand. He stood in the barn door, and he did not move, and he did not call out. She did not move either. Not for a very long time. He said he watched her for what he believed was 4 or 5 minutes, but which the composition book, in his own hand, records as 22 minutes, because he had a watch, and at some point he had had the presence of mind to look at it. And then she raised her hand and waved. Not a beckon, a wave. The small, flat, side-to-side wave of a woman across a parking lot who has seen you and wants you to know she has seen you. And Owen Pruitt stood in the door of his uncle's barn and started counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. He got one wrong. On purpose. The first time in his life. And 440 feet up the hill, the woman in the yellow dress lowered her hand. He counted until she was gone. That is not a figure of speech, and it did not happen the way you are picturing. She did not vanish. Owen Pruitt counted out loud, wrong, in the door of a barn, and the woman at the tree line turned and walked into the woods at an ordinary walking pace. And the trees took her the way trees take anybody, a little at a time, and then the pasture was empty. He counted to 300 and something anyway. He does not know the number. He knows he was still counting when he got to the house, and he was still counting with the bar in his hands. That was the 29th of May. And here is the thing about that date that Owen did not work out until the middle of June, sitting at a kitchen table with a composition book and a pencil, and that I want to hand you now, because it is the engine of everything that happens in the last 4 weeks. It came closer every time. Not randomly, not dramatically. On a schedule you could put in a column, which is exactly what he did. The 29th of May, 440 feet. The 1st of June, 390. The 3rd of June, 341. He paced that one at first light and wrote it down. The 5th of June, 302. About 50 feet closer, every other day. In a yellow dress, at the top of the pasture, in the late afternoon, standing in the open, waving once, and then standing. He counted every time. It went every time. And every time the going was ordinary, a woman turning and walking into the trees. He measured the interval, and he did the arithmetic on the 6th of June, and he got a date, and the date was the 10th of June, and he sat there and looked at it, and then he remembered Lovey Sizemore's hand on his arm on the church steps on the 29th of April. Then you have got about 6 weeks. 6 weeks from the 29th of April is the 10th of June. An old woman in a barn coat, standing in a church parking lot, had done that arithmetic in her head off the fact that something had walked on his porch and had been accurate to the day and had said it in a pleasant voice and gone to her car. That is Ashcombe. That is what living there does to a person. They know the schedule. They have all watched it run before. Now. On the 7th of June, Owen Pruitt went into the woods, and this is the part of this case that gets told the most and understood the least, so I am going to be careful with it. He did not go up there out of courage, and he did not go up there because he had a plan. He went because the composition book said the 10th of June, and he had 3 days, and because the tree line is where she came from every time, and because he was a man who worked with his hands, and he had reached the end of what he could stand to do with them, which was nothing. He went at 8 in the morning, in full sun, with the shotgun he did not really believe in, a 2-cell flashlight, a hatchet, 4 pounds of rock salt in a feed sack, and 100 feet of mason's line, which he tied to the fence post at the top of the pasture and paid out behind him as he went, because he was not a fool. The line ran out in 100 feet. He tied on more. He had brought 300 feet total. It ran out at 300. And here is the first thing he found, at somewhere around 250 feet in, on a slope that is about a 14-degree grade going up toward the top of Coldwater Knob. The woods were clean. I mean that literally. In the way the tree line was clean, there was no undergrowth, no greenbrier, no laurel, no blowdown, no rotten logs lying where they fell, no branch litter, big trees, well spaced, and between them a floor of old leaf mold as even as a rug. And you could see, he said, 300 yards in any direction, like walking through a hall of columns. There is no forest in West Virginia like that. Not one. That state is the second most heavily forested state in the country, and every acre of it is a fight. You cannot walk 50 feet in those woods without going around something. Owen Pruitt walked 250 feet up a mountainside without turning his shoulders once, and there was no sound at all. No birds. He wrote in the book that evening, "Did not hear one bird in the woods, heard them in the pasture behind me the whole way." At 300 feet his line ran out, and he tied it off to a hickory, and he stood there, and he had a decision to make, and he made the wrong one. And he made it for the best reason there is, which is that he could see something up ahead. He went another 150 feet without a line, and he came out into a clearing. It was round. He paced it. About 110 feet across, near enough circular that a mason with an eye for it will tell you somebody laid it out with a cord and a center pin. Grass in it, low and even, no trees, no stumps, no old stumps, no depressions. Where stumps rot out, and stumps in that country take 60 years to disappear and leave a hole for a century after that. And around the edge of it, set into the ground, spaced evenly, were stones. 9 of them. He counted them 4 times, which tells you something about the state he was in. 9 stones, roughly 2 feet by 1, set flush with the ground, each one bearing a shallow cut mark on its face. 4 uprights and a diagonal. On each stone, 9 stones, 45. And in the center of the clearing was a second door. Now, when I say a second door, I want you to correct the picture you have just made, because everyone gets this wrong, and Owen himself got it wrong for the first 10 seconds. It was not standing in a hillside. There is no hillside in the middle of a clearing. It was lying flat. A door frame, in that same pale hard stone, 5 pieces, dry laid, set flush into the ground, like the lid of a cellar, and in it a door, white oak, 5 planks, hand-forged straps, clenched nails, 7 feet, 1 inch, by 3 feet, 4 inches, the same door, the same dimensions as the one in the bank on the county road, a mile and a half away, and 800 feet lower, and Owen Pruitt knew the dimensions because he was a mason, and he had stood on those 3 worn steps in April and looked at those joints and been humbled by them. And this one had a keyhole too. Low, off-center, 1.5 inches by a 1/2 inch. Except lying flat, there is no low. Lying flat, that slot is 34 inches from the sill in a direction that does not mean anything anymore, and the grass around it was flat in a half circle. The same flat he had seen from the truck window on the 9th of April, in front of the door in the bank, and had noticed and not thought about again for 11 days. He did not touch it. He wants that known. He stood at the edge of that clearing for the book says 9 minutes, and he did not step over the line of stones, and he did not go to it, and he did not put his hand on it. But he did one thing. He stood at the edge, and he said out loud, into a clearing with no birds in it, "There's 2 of you. And I have thought for a long time about why he said that, and the best I can tell you is what he told the man who eventually told me, which is that it was not brave and it was not smart, it was arithmetic. Because a door in a hillside is a door into a hill. But two doors, 1.5 miles apart, at two different elevations, in two different attitudes, framed in the same stone, by the same hands, to the same dimensions, that is not a door into a hill, that is a door into whatever both of them open onto. And if there are two, there is no reason on this earth to think there are only two. I will tell you now, because you have earned it, and because you are going to want it, there are more. There are at least 4. There is the one on the county road. There is the flat one in the clearing on Coldwater Knob. There is one in Pocahontas County, in a creek bed, that was photographed in 1968 by a fisheries biologist who thought it was a mine adit and whose photograph is in a file in Elkins. And there is one that a man in Kentucky wrote to a newspaper about in 1954 and which I have not been able to find and which I am still looking for. Same dimensions. Every one. 7 feet, 1 inch, by 3 feet, 4 inches. Pale stone that does not come from where it is. A slot 34 inches up. Hold that, because at the end of this, when I tell you what was found among Owen Pruitt's effects in 2004, you are going to need it. He walked back down out of those woods, following his own mason's line, and he did not run. And when he got to the fence at the top of the pasture and stepped over into the grass, he said, the sound came back all at once. Birds, wind, the creek. A truck on the county road, 1 mile off, like a door, had been opened somewhere behind him. And when he untied his line from the fence post and started coiling it in, he found that the far end of it, the end he had tied off to the hickory at 300 feet, was already coiled, neatly. In his own coil, over and under, the way a mason coils a line, lying at the base of the fence post on the pasture side of the fence. He had walked back holding it in his hands. He had followed it the whole way in. If you are still with me this deep in the dark, drop a comment and let me know. I want to see who is left. And if you have got a place in your county where the woods go quiet like that, say so. Somebody reading it will know exactly what you mean. Now then, 3 days to the 10th of June. There is one more thing from that first week of June that I have to give you, because it is the only time in this whole case that anybody but Owen Pruitt got a close look at the schedule while it was running. On the 6th of June, Dwight Renner came up Bickle Road in a 1976 Chevrolet pickup at about 7 in the evening with a case of beer he had no intention of drinking, which is how a 25-year-old man in that country tells you he has come to talk about something. He sat on the porch steps. He said his wife had sent him. He said Lovey Sizemore had told his mother, and his mother had told his wife, that the Pruitt boy was standing out in the yard in the afternoons, counting at the tree line, and would somebody go up there. And then he said, "How close is it getting?" Owen said, 300 feet. And Dwight Renner said, "It was 400 on Tuesday, wasn't it?" He was not guessing. He had grown up 1,100 feet from that pasture, and he had watched this happen before to a man named Corbin in 1970, when Dwight was 16, and he knew the shape of it, the way a man raised on a river knows the shape of a rise. They sat on that porch until dark, and Dwight Renner told him about the dares. He said every boy in Ashcombe from about 1960 on knew the rule, and every one of them knew a boy who had broken it. He said in his own class at the school in Hendon there had been 4 boys from that hollow, and 3 of them had knocked on that door before they were 15. He said, Kenny Sizemore done it in 71, 4 times, with a stick showing off. Nothing happened. He is in Ohio now with 3 kids and a boat, and I would bet you $100 he has told that story at a party. He said, Tuck Renner, my uncle, the one that dared you, he done it in 52, same summer as you, and he was fine, and he was fine for 30 year, and then in 83 he went out one night and did not come back, and that is in the book too, and it took 31 year to come due. And Owen said, "How do you live here?" And Dwight Renner, 25 years old, said the thing that I think is the truest sentence anybody says in this entire 3 hours. He said, "The same way you live anywhere, most days nothing happens." That is what nobody outside ever gets about a place like this. They think we are all sitting in the dark being scared. We ain't. We are putting up hay and taking the kids to the dentist in Hendon and arguing about the church roof. It is not a haunted town. It is a town with one rule in it. Everywhere has got rules. Ours is a door. He said, "The trouble is that it is a rule about the exact hour of your life when you are least able to keep a rule. Nobody breaks it when they are happy." Then he said one more thing before he left, and Owen wrote it in the composition book that night in quotation marks. He said, "Mr. Pruitt, I am going to say this, and then I am going to go home to my wife. Everybody in this hollow that it got them the same way. Not one of them was drug out. Every single one of them stood up out of a chair and walked to a door and put their hand on it, and every single one of them had a real good reason. It don't fight you. It just waits till the reason is good enough." Charlene Renner, 26 years old, standing in her own yard with a wet sheet in her hands 20 months later, said "Mama," and knew it the second it came out of her mouth. Her husband had said it out loud on a porch in June of 1979, and it did not save her, because knowing the rule and being able to keep it at the moment it costs you something are two different muscles, and there is no exercise in this world for the second one. The 8th of June was 251 feet. He paced it at 6 in the morning and drove a stake where she had stood, because by then he had started driving stakes, and there was a line of them up that pasture like the stations of something. She had come at 4:20 in the afternoon. She had stood 11 minutes. She had waved. He had counted wrong, out loud, from the porch, and she had walked into the trees. But on the 8th of June, there was something new, and he wrote it down in the composition book in a hand that is noticeably worse than the entries around it. June 8, 251 feet. Could see her face today. That is the whole entry. He did not write another word about it for 2 days. The 9th of June was 202 feet, and he could hear her, not words. She was humming. Off key. Off key in a specific way. Ruth Pruitt could not hold a pitch, and she had a particular way of failing at it, sliding up under the note, and never quite arriving, and doing it cheerfully, and doing it while she worked. 202 feet up a pasture on a still June evening, a woman in a yellow dress stood at the edge of the woods and hummed off key, sliding up under the note. And Owen Pruitt stood on his porch and counted out loud and got one wrong on purpose, and it went. And he went inside and sat down on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet for about an hour. Here is what I want you to understand about the 9th of June. He was not frightened that evening. He wrote it down later when he could. He said he was not frightened, he was hopeful, and that the hope came up in him so fast and so complete that it was in his chest before he had any say in it. He said that for about 4 seconds, in the middle of counting, some part of him that had nothing to do with his brain thought, "She came back." And Orlean Cobb had told him, "It does not want you. It wants the shape of what you lost, and it is going to hand you the shape, and it is going to hand it to you gently, at a distance, over 11 days, at 50 feet a time, so that by the time it is close enough to touch, you have had almost 2 weeks to get used to the idea. That is the whole method. There is no trick in it. It is patience, and it is kindness, and both of those are load-bearing, and if you take one thing from this whole case, take that. The thing on Coldwater Knob has never once in 200 years had to be frightening in order to win. The 10th of June, 1979, was a Sunday. It rained in the morning, hard, from about 5 until 9. The rain gauge on the springhouse post read 1 3/4 inches. It cleared by 11 and it turned hot, and by 4 in the afternoon it was 79 degrees, with the ground steaming and the whole hollow smelling like wet stone and cut grass. He did not go to church. He worked in the garden. He hoed 2 rows of potatoes, and he tied up tomatoes, and he did it badly. And at about 2 o'clock he went in and got the composition book and sat on the porch steps and read the whole thing from the 9th of April to the 9th of June, front to back. And then he did 4 things. And I want to list them, because these 4 things are why we are having this conversation at all, and why he did not become a mark cut in a poplar board in a store on Front Street. First, he went through the house and shut every window and dropped the sash locks, all 11 of them. Second, he took the bar out of the brackets on the front door and looked at it. Somewhere in the last 2 months, a thought had gotten into him that he had not let all the way up, that the bar was oak, and oak splits, and 4 inches through is a great deal, but it is not a wall. So he went to the barn and got 2 lengths of angle iron off his uncle's junk pile, and he drilled and lagged them along the top and bottom of that bar, and it took him 2 hours, and it turned a piece of white oak into something you would have to bring an axe and a lot of time to. Third, he laid a line of rock salt along the sill of the front door, the back door, and every window in the house, which took most of what he had left of 11 pounds. And fourth, and this is the one, he sat down at the kitchen table with a pencil, and he wrote out in a column every small human thing he could remember about his wife. He got to 61 items. The book survives. I have never read anything in my life that hurt worse to read than that page, and it is not a page about a haunting, it is a page about a marriage. She hummed sharp. She salted her coffee once by mistake in 1966 and kept doing it. She could not tell left from right without looking at her hands. She said, "Wash." She hated the smell of vinegar and would not be in the kitchen when I cleaned windows. She laughed sideways. She read the last page of a book first, every time, and did not think this was strange. She counted stairs out loud and got 1 wrong on purpose. 61 items, and at the bottom of the page he wrote 1 more line and underlined it twice. It has never got one of these wrong yet. That is not because it is her. It is because it has not needed to be close enough to try. He barred the door at dusk. Dusk on the 10th of June in that part of West Virginia is about 8:40 in the evening. She did not come to the tree line that day. He wrote in the book at 9. Nothing at 4, nothing at 6, nothing at 8. First day since May 29, with no appearance. Now you understand why he had shut 11 windows and lagged iron to a piece of oak, because a schedule that has run like a clock for 11 days and then stops is not a reprieve. He had done the arithmetic on the 6th of June and gotten the 10th, and on the 10th it did not come to the tree line, and there is only one reason. A thing that has been coming 50 feet closer every other day does not stop at 200 feet. It was 10:50 at night when the lamps went down, both of them at once to half, and this time they did not come back up. They held at half, and the flame in each of them was, he said, the color of a lit match seen through a bottle orange, going to brown at the top, no white in it at all, and the cold came into the room from the floor. He sat in the chair by the stove, facing the door, with the shotgun across his knees and the composition book on the table beside him, and he started counting out loud, and he got the 7th one wrong, and he kept going. And at 11 o'clock, somebody came up on the porch. Not 4 steps this time. He counted them. 11 steps, crossing the porch from the far end, from the direction of the walnut tree, slow. And the 3rd board from the steps popped under weight, and the 11th step put whatever it was directly in front of the door. He kept counting. He said his voice was steady for the first 30 numbers, and then it was not steady, but it kept making numbers, which is all it has to do. And then a woman's voice on the other side of that door said, "Owen." He stopped counting. I have to be honest with you about why. He always was. He said he did not stop out of terror. He stopped because it was her voice, not close, not a good likeness. Her voice. The actual specific sound of the woman he had been married to for 13 years and had buried 20 months before, and there is a thing that happens in a body when it hears that sound that is older and faster than any rule any old woman ever gave anybody on a porch. He stopped counting, and the room went quiet, and in the quiet, on the other side of 4 inches of oak and 2 lengths of angle iron, the voice said, "Owen," twice. A person hollers twice. Hollis Teague, behind a counter, in April, in a store that smelled like feed and kerosene, with both hands flat on the wood. It will not say it twice. A person hollers twice. That is the tell. That is the only tell you get. And Owen Pruitt, who had barred his door at dusk, and salted his sills, and lagged iron to his bar, and written out 61 small true things about his wife on a piece of paper in the next room. Owen Pruitt stood up out of that chair and put his hand on the bar. I want to sit here for a second, because everybody listening to this has already said, out loud or in their chest, don't. And you are right. And I want to tell you that he was not stupid and he was not weak, and he had done more preparation than any other person in this entire 200-year record. He had studied it. He had a system. He had the rules from the only living person who had them. And he had a bad rule mixed in with the good ones, given to him in good faith by a decent man whose family had been carrying that rule since 1892, and the bad rule fired at 11 o'clock at night on the 10th of June with his hand on the bar, because Hollis Teague's tell was not wrong, it was incomplete. And the difference between wrong and incomplete is the difference between a rule that fails you in the daylight when you can afford it and a rule that fails you at 11 at night with something standing on your porch. It says your name once from the hill. Out there, at a distance, across ground that is not yours, it gets one. That is the manners. That is the formality. But a porch is not a hill. A porch is a threshold. A porch is inside the arrangement. Something that has walked up 11 boards to stand in front of your door is not calling to you across a field anymore. It is at the door, and at a door it can say your name as many times as a person would, because at a door it is doing the other thing. At a door it is asking to be let in, and asking is what it is for. His hand was on the bar. He had lifted it in the brackets. He was clear about this every time he told it, and he only told it 3 times in his life. He had lifted that bar a ½ inch out of the iron, enough that the door came off the stop and there was a line of dark along the edge of it. And what stopped him was the 8th board. Because while he was standing there with the bar half up, the thing on the porch shifted its weight, and the board under it creaked. And it was the 8th board from the steps. And the 8th board from the steps had a rotten end, and Owen Pruitt had put his foot through it on the 14th of April and had replaced it on the 15th with a new piece of poplar, and a new poplar board 8 weeks old does not creak. It does not creak because he had nailed it himself, with 8 nails, 2 at each bearing, and he had sat back on his heels afterward on that porch in the sun and been pleased with it, in the small stupid way a man is pleased with a small piece of good work in a bad year. The board that creaked was the old one, the board that had been there in 1952, and Owen Pruitt stood in the dark with a bar half out of its brackets and understood that the thing on his porch was not standing on his porch. It was standing on the porch. It remembered the porch as it had been the last time. It had a reason to know that porch, 27 years earlier, when a boy of 11 had come home from a dare with his heart going and his hand still stinging. It got one wrong. Find the one that ain't. And when you find it, say it out loud. It does not like to be corrected. He dropped the bar back into the brackets. Iron on iron, a sound like a rifle in that house. And he said, out loud, in a voice he described afterward as somebody else's, "That board's new. I put it in myself in April. It don't creak." And every sound in the world stopped. I mean that as flatly as I can say it. The composition book entry, written at 4 in the morning while it was still going on, in handwriting that shakes, says, "When I said about the board, everything quit. Could not hear the creak. Could not hear my own self breathe. Put my hand on my chest to check." He said the silence lasted somewhere between 4 seconds and a minute. He had a watch, and he did not look at it, and he never forgave himself for that, which is the most Owen Pruitt detail in this entire case. Then the pressure came on to the door. Not a push, not the patient 5-minute lean of the 21st of April. This was a load. He said the door bowed. White oak planks, 5 of them, laid up and clenched, and he watched the middle of that door come toward him. He put it at an inch, and I think a frightened man in a dark room overestimates, and I also think it does not matter whether it was an inch or a quarter of one, because a door that bows a quarter inch is a door under about a ton of pressure. The angle iron he had lagged on that afternoon groaned. One of the lags backed out about a turn he found it in the morning, standing proud of the wood, the bright thread of it showing, and the brackets held, hand-forged, mortised into the frame by somebody in 1922 who put 4 of them on a farmhouse door because he had a reason to, and Owen Pruitt sat back down in the chair, 8 feet from a door that was bending, and started counting out loud again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. He said the counting was the hardest physical labor he had ever done. He said it was harder than the day he and 2 men set a 400-pound lintel by hand in Dayton in 1969. He said the trouble was not fear. The trouble was that his mouth wanted to say something else, that there was a pressure behind his teeth the entire time, and the pressure was a name, and the name was hers, and the whole of his body from the ribs up was trying to get that name out of him, and the only thing standing in its way was a stupid, meaningless, unfinishable string of numbers with a hole punched in it. He counted for 4 hours and 10 minutes. I want that number to land, because it is the number that people skip past. 11 o'clock at night until 10 past 3 in the morning. Not a scene, not a jump. 4 hours and 10 minutes of a 38-year-old man in a chair in a dark kitchen saying numbers out loud, wrong, on purpose, without stopping, while something on the other side of an oak door tried the only 3 things it is allowed to try. And it tried all 3. That is the other thing about that night. In 4 hours it ran the whole formality, in order, the way you would work down a list. At about 11:30 it knocked, 3 times, on the outside of the door, at the height of a man's hand. And here is where 200 years of that hollow's teaching turns out to be worth every night of it, because a knock is a thing that goes one direction. It knocks, and it is asking. And if he had knocked back, if he had rapped the table, if he had struck the wall, if he had answered a knock with a knock, which is the single most natural thing a human being does, the count would have been his. He did not knock back. He counted. At about 1 in the morning it stopped knocking, and it started talking. It used her voice for a while. It said his name a number of times, and then it stopped saying his name because that was not working, and it started saying other things, and the composition book does not record what they were. There is a line in the book at that point that says, "said things," not putting them down. The only one he ever repeated, and he repeated it exactly once, to the man who told me 41 years later, was this. At about 1:30, the voice on the other side of the door stopped trying to be gentle and said, in his wife's voice, in a tone of ordinary domestic exasperation, "Owen, it is cold out here." And he said the reason that one nearly got him is that it was the most Ruth thing it had said all night, and it was the first thing it had said all night that was not about him. He counted. At about 2, it changed tactics again. And this is the part that I think is the most important thing in this whole record, because, as far as I have been able to find, nobody else has ever survived long enough at that stage to report it. It went around the house, slowly, window to window, 11 windows, and he had shut and locked and salted every one of them that afternoon, and he heard the sash of each one tried in turn, a small dry knock of wood against wood, as something lifted at the bottom rail and found it would not go. And at each window it said one thing, not to him. He was very clear about that. It was not addressing him, it was his words, reading the room out loud. At the kitchen window it said, "She stood there." At the window over the sink it said, "You washed her plate." At the front room window it said, "You have got her coat in the wardrobe, and you have never once opened that door." And Owen Pruitt sat in the middle of that house and counted. and every one of those things was true, and every one of those things was a thing he had never told a living soul. At the last window, the small one in the back bedroom, it said one more thing, and this is the only one of them he ever wrote down, and he wrote it down in the book at 4 a.m. in capital letters. It said, "You did not count the stairs." He had told nobody. He had not told Orlean Cobb. It is not in the composition book anywhere before that night. He had counted the 11 stairs to the loft on the 9th of April, silently in his head, out of a habit he did not know he had, and he had never in his life mentioned to a single human being that his wife counted stairs out loud and got one wrong. Whatever was at that window on the 10th of June, 1979, had gotten inside him far enough to find a habit he did not know he had, and to know what it meant, and to know it was the one thing in that house it could say that might make him get up. And it was right to try. Because he did get up. He got up, and he took 2 steps toward the hall before he understood he was doing it. And he stopped, and he stood there in the dark, shaking with his mouth open, and the number he was on was 94, and he said 94 again, out loud, wrong, twice, and then 95, and sat back down. At 3:10 a.m, it quit. He said there was no sound of departure. The porch board did not pop. The steps did not creak. What happened was that the cold went out of the floor, and the lamps came up out of brown to yellow, and the creak came back. He could hear water again, which he had not been able to hear for 4 hours, and he knew he was in an ordinary house. He kept counting until 4:30. At 5, with the sky gray, he took the bar out and opened the door. There was nothing on the porch, nothing in the yard, nothing in the mud from the morning's rain, and there had been a lot of mud, and this is the part that turns some people's stomachs, and I understand why. Not one print, not one mark. He walked the whole way around that house at 5 a.m. on ground so soft his own boots sank half an inch, and there was no track of any kind anywhere, except on the porch. The porch was dry, and there was dust on it the way there is dust on any board porch, and in the dust, in front of the door, there was one thing, a half circle of flattened dust about 3 feet across in front of the sill. The same shape he had seen in the grass in front of the door on the county road on the 9th of April. The same shape that was in the grass around the flat door, in the clearing on Coldwater Knob, the shape of something that had been standing there a long while, and had been standing there, by the look of it, in one place, with its weight down, for 4 hours and 10 minutes. He swept it off before he left. He wants that known too. He got a broom off the porch nail, and he swept that half circle of dust away, the way a man wipes a table, and he could not have told you why, and I think it is the most human thing in this entire record. It is what you do. Something stood outside your house all night, and in the morning you sweep your porch, because sweeping your porch is a thing you know how to do, and nothing else about that morning was. He got in his truck at 6:30 a.m. on the 11th of June, 1979, and he drove to Front Street. And he sat outside Teague's store for 40 minutes, until Hollis Teague came to open it, and when Hollis got out of his car and saw Owen sitting in that truck, he did not say good morning. He looked at his face, and he said, "Get in the car." They sat in Hollis Teague's 1974 Impala on Front Street in the rain, with the engine running for the heater, and Owen Pruitt told him what had happened. All of it, including the bar. And Hollis Teague let him finish. And then he put his head back against the seat and closed his eyes and said, "It said it twice." Owen said, "It said it twice." And Hollis said, "Then it was on the porch." And Owen said, "Yes." And Hollis Teague, 66 years old, who had stood behind that counter for 45 years and had given 3 warnings to a great many people and had watched some of them work, said something that I think about more than almost anything else in this case. He said, "My granddaddy give me them 3 rules in 1922 when I was 9-year-old. He learned them off of what happened to him in 92. And he never said nothing about a porch. And I never said nothing about a porch, and I have said them rules to maybe 40 people in my life." He said, "How many of them do you reckon it got on a porch?" They drove out the Mullins branch together that morning, the 11th of June, in the rain, and walked the last half-mile, and Orleen Cobb was on the porch with 3 cups of coffee poured. 3. She listened to the whole of it without interrupting once, and when he got to the part about the board, she put her hand flat on the arm of her chair, and when he got to the part about the stairs, she closed her eyes. And when he finished, she said, "You did not let it in." He said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "Then there ain't a mark for it. Understand me? There ain't no mark for a bad night. There ain't no mark for being scared, and there ain't no mark for near. The board only takes what was give." She got the ledger anyway. She wrote a line in it, and she turned it so he could see, and it was not in the 3 columns. It was written across the bottom of the page, in her hand, and it said, "The 10th of June, 1979. Owen D. Pruitt. 4 hours, 10 minutes at the door. Counted, held, nothing given." She said, "There ain't been a line like that in this book since 1892. Now I have to tell you what happened next, and it is not what people expect, and it is the reason I think this case is worth 3 hours of your evening instead of 10 minutes. Owen Pruitt did not leave. He stayed 11 more days, and when people hear that, they assume he had gone crazy, or that it had gotten a hold of him, or that some part of him wanted her badly enough to stay in reach. And I want to be careful with him here, because he was a real man who had a real life, and he explained his reasons twice on the record, and they were sound, and I am going to give them to you the way he gave them. The first reason was the garden. That sounds like a joke. It is not. He said, "I had potatoes in the ground, and I had put them there in April in a month when I did not care whether I lived, and by June I found that I did care, and it seemed to me a poor way to show it to walk off and leave them." The second reason was Orleen Cobb, because on that porch, on the 11th of June, when he had finished telling her about the worst night of his life, and she had written her line in the ledger, that old woman had looked at him and said, "How long are you stopping?" And he had said, "I do not know." And Orleen Cobb, 88 years old, who had been looking for 40 years for somebody to hand a 200-year-old account book to, said, "I would take it kindly if you would stop a while." She did not ask him to take the keeping. She never asked him. That is important, and I will come back to it. What she asked him for was 11 days, and what she used those 11 days for was to teach him everything she knew, in order, at a kitchen table, with the ledger open, the way you would teach a man a trade. He went out there every day from the 12th of June to the 22nd, 6-7 hours at a time. And he filled the second composition book with what she told him, and that second book is the single most complete document that exists on this thing, and I am going to give you the 4 parts of it that matter most. The first is the history of the count, and I have given you most of that already. 411 marks from 1788 to 1931, and 51 from 1931 to 1979. In a town whose population went from 600 to 109 in the same period. But here is the piece I held back. Orleen Cobb had done that arithmetic herself in 1950 with a pencil on a Sunday afternoon, and she had found something in it, and she showed it to Owen Pruitt on the 14th of June, and he checked it, because he was a man who checked things. The marks cluster, not evenly, not 2 a year. They come in runs 3 or 4 or 6 in a single year, and then 11 or 15 years of nothing at all, and then another run. And the runs, when you lay them out, fall in 19-year intervals, near enough that you can predict them. 1791, 1810, 1829, 1848, 1867, and that one is the biggest run in the whole book, 9 marks in 14 months, and it is the year after the war ended, and the hollow was full of men who had lost people. 1886, 1905, 1924, 1943, 1962, 1981. She showed him that in 1979, and she tapped the page and said, 2 year. And Owen Pruitt said, "Ma'am, if it runs on 19 years, then why is it after me now?" this is a quiet year. And Orlean Cobb said, because you are the one that is here. It don't hunt in the quiet years, it courts. The second thing she taught him was the shutting. Because Hollis Teague's second rule, if you find the door open, do not close. It is the rule that everybody in Ashcombe knows and almost nobody knows the back half of. The back half is that somebody has to close it. It cannot be left. And the reason Preston Teague spent 49 years barring doors and counting in the dark is not that he shut it, it is that he shut it wrong. Orlean said, you shut it with your back to it. He said, ma'am? She said, you do not face it. You do not push it with your hands, and you do not look in it. You put your back against the outside face of that door, and you set your heels in that dished stone, and you walk it shut backwards, and while you do it you count out loud, and you get one wrong, and you do not stop counting till it is home, and you are walking away from it in the road. She said, Preston Teague put his hands on that door and pushed it shut looking at it, and he was 29, and there was a child in his wagon, and I have never in my life blamed him for it. But he faced it. He give it his face for as long as it took to shut, and it kept a little of him, and he spent the rest of his life with a piece of himself in there, and he knew it, and that is why he counted. She said, there is a right way and a wrong way to do everything, son, including a kindness. The third thing was what she called the arrangement, and it is the closest anybody ever got to a theory of the thing. She said, you have been asking me what it is since the day you come out here, and I have been telling you I do not know, and that is still so. But I will tell you what I think, and you will know it is what I think, and not what I know, because I am going to say I think, and my aunt, never once in her life, said I think, and I have always held that against her a little. She said, I think it is a keeping place, not a creature, a place. And I think there is a thing in it that does the keeping. The way there is a man in a store that does the selling, he ain't the store. She said, and I think a long time ago there was people here, or people before the people, that found that hole in the world and could not stop it and could not fill it. And so they done the only thing anybody has ever been able to do with a thing they cannot beat. They give it manners. They built a frame around it, and they hung a door in it, and they cut a slot for the asking, and they made a rule that it has got to be let, and then they went away, or they died out, or they turned into us, and all that is left of the whole arrangement is a door in a bank on a county road, and a board behind a stove, and one old woman on a branch with salt in her sills. And she said, and I think whatever agreed to that arrangement on the other side has been holding up its end for a very long time and has got very, very tired of it. It is still keeping the rules, every one of them. It has not broke a rule in 200 years, and I do not believe it can. But there is a difference between a thing that keeps the rules because it wants to and a thing that keeps the rules because it has to, and the second one will work every crack in them there is. The fourth thing was the keyhole. He asked her on the 19th of June, the last real day of it, whether Isaac Pell had been right, whether the slot was for speaking through, and Orlean Cobb said, he was right, and he was a fool, and being right is what made him a fool. She said, it is for speaking through, but it ain't for us to speak through. She said, cut low, he said, 34-inch. Height of a kneeling man's mouth, he said, and he was that pleased with himself. Son, it is 34-inch on the outside. Do you know what is on the inside of that door? He said he did not. And she said, neither do I. But I have thought about that slot for 70 years, and here is what I have come to. If you was going to build a door to hold a thing in, and you knowed that thing could not come out unless it was let, and you knowed that the only way it could get let was to talk somebody into it, where in the world would you put the hole? She waited. He said, as low as you could. And she said, as low as you could, so that anything on the far side that wants to talk to a man has got to get down on the ground to do it, not us, it. That slot ain't a mouthpiece, it is a humiliation. Whoever built that door made the thing behind it lie down in the dirt to beg. And then she said the last thing, and it is the thing I have carried around since I first read it in a composition book in a lawyer's file box in Charleston," she said, "and now think on what it means that in 1892 a 6-year-old girl was sat down on that floor, 3 foot back, sat down, upright, facing out, with her face at about 34" off the ground." Owen Pruitt did not say anything for a while, and then he said, "It put her at the slot." And Orlean Cobb said, "It has been trying for 200 year to get somebody on this side to hold the conversation for it." He left on the 23rd of June, 1979. He did not decide to. That is the honest version, and he never dressed it up. On the night of the 21st, he woke at about 2 in the morning to the sound of somebody counting, out loud, in the house, in the front room, 11 feet from where he lay, a woman's voice going up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 stairs to that loft, and a true count, every number of it, right the way through, with no hole in it anywhere. And he lay in the dark, and he understood 2 things at once. The first was that it had gotten in far enough now to have the count itself, to know what he had been doing every night for a month, and to hand it back to him. And the second was the one that saved him, and it is the smallest thing in this entire story, and it is the whole of it. Ruth would have gotten one wrong. 13 years of marriage, every staircase, every time, on purpose, cheerfully, because if you count a thing right, you have finished with it, and she liked to leave a little unfinished. The thing in his front room at 2 in the morning, on the 22nd of June, counted 11 stairs perfectly. He said out loud, into the dark, "You counted it right," and the counting stopped. And he did not sleep, and at first light he went out and dug up 2 rows of potatoes because they were far enough along to be worth something, and he put his tools in the truck, and he went down to Teague's store and paid what he owed on his account. And Hollis Teague took his money and shook his hand and said, "You are a Pruitt, and you have got sense, which is a rarer combination than you would think." He drove out the Mullins branch one more time. Orlean Cobb was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. He had told her nothing about leaving. There were 2 cups. He said, "I am going." She said, "I know it." He said, "Ma'am, the keeping, you have got nobody." And Orlean Cobb said, "I have got nobody in this hollow. That is a fact, and I have made my peace with it. And I am 88, and I am not going to pretend I ain't been begging the Lord about it for 40 year." And then she said, "But I did not ask you, and I ain't going to, and you want to know why." He said he did. And she said, "Because the keeping ain't a job you can be talked into. Every soul that ever took it because there was nobody else, and they knowed it, and knowing it is the whole of the qualification. You knowing it, and me asking you, is 2 different things. And if I ask you, you will say yes out of manners, and manners is exactly the thing that Hill runs on. I will not do to you what it does." Then she gave him the ledger. She put the oilcloth around it and set it in his hands and said, "Not to keep, to hold. Take it out of this hollow. Do not write in it. If somebody comes for it, you will know them, and if nobody comes, then you will have to decide something when you are old, and I will be dead, and it will not be my business." He said, "What if I am the one that is supposed to come for it?" And Orlean Cobb, 88 years old, on a porch on the Mullins branch, said, "Then you will know, and you will not have to ask me." She died on the 9th of February, 1981, at the age of 90, and I want you to hold 1981, because that is a year I have already given you, and you already know what is in it. He drove out of Ashcombe at about 4 in the afternoon on the 23rd of June, 1979, with a truck full of tools and a box of potatoes and a 200-year-old ledger wrapped in oilcloth on the seat beside him. And at mile 9½ where the county road bends hard around the base of Coldwater Knob and the hillside comes down close on the left, the door was standing open. He said the first thing he felt was not fear, it was something much worse and much more human. It was the feeling of being caught, of being a man who has said his goodbyes and paid his bill, and is 400 feet from being gone, and finding one more thing on the list. He stopped the truck in the road. He did not pull into the gravel. The door stood open inward all the way, flat against whatever is inside, and he could see, from 30 feet away, in the 4 o'clock light of a June afternoon, about 3 or 4 feet of floor, dressed stone, flat, dry. Going back into the hill and stopping being visible in a way that he said was not like a room going dark. He said it was like the floor going out of focus. He said the edge of what he could see was not a shadow, it was an end, and looking at it made the muscles at the back of his eyes ache the way they do when you try to read something in a dream. And there was nothing sitting on it. He said he had already had the picture in his head. From the moment he came around the bend, a woman in a yellow dress, sitting 3 feet in, with her face at 34 inches, facing out, waiting to be asked, and there was nothing there, and the relief of that put him on the steering wheel for a second, and then he understood that nothing sitting on it meant something was standing behind it. He got out of the truck. Now, he could have driven on. I want to say that plainly. He could have put that truck in gear and gone 11.5 miles to State Route 9 and never come back, and he would have been within every rule Hollis Teague or Orlean Cobb ever gave anybody, because rule number 2 is that you go and tell somebody, and Hollis Teague was 1.5 miles behind him with a telephone and a lifetime of practice. He did not, and when he was asked why, 40 years on, he said, "Because the person you go tell is a 66-year-old man who would have had to come and do it, or a 90-year-old woman who could not have. And I had 2 good legs, and she had told me how." So, on the 23rd of June, 1979, at about 4 in the afternoon, Owen Pruitt walked across a county road in West Virginia and shut a door. He did it the way she said. He went up the 3 worn stones with his back to the opening the entire way. He never once looked into it. He set his heels in the dished part of that sill, worn an inch deep by God knows how many people standing exactly where he was standing across God knows how many years, and he put his shoulder blades flat against the outside face of that oak. And he counted out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and he pushed backwards. He said it went hard. Not like something resisting, like weight. Like walking a full wheelbarrow up a plank. He said the hinges made no sound at all, which is not possible for wrought straps on a pin that has been in the weather since before the Republic. And he said the cold came around him from behind and over both shoulders, and the cold was the same cold that had come into his kitchen from the floor, and he counted. He said that part way through, he does not know how far. He was somewhere in the 60s. A hand touched the back of his left hand. Not grabbed. Touched. The way a woman puts her fingers on the back of your hand at a table to get your attention when there are other people talking. He counted. He got the 68th number wrong on purpose because he had gotten so used to putting the hole in that he was doing it without choosing where, and he pushed, and he did not turn his head. And a voice about 11 inches from his left ear on the inside of the door, in the yellow dress voice, in a tone that was not pleading and was not angry but was, he said, reasonable. The tone of a person clearing up a misunderstanding said, "Owen, you know it is me." And he said the true thing, which is the only thing anybody in 200 years has ever had that works. He said, "I know it ain't," and he pushed it home. The door came into the frame with no sound whatsoever, not a thump, not a click. He said that the absence of that sound was the single most frightening thing that happened to him in 3 months, because he had spent his whole working life around doors and stone, and there is no such thing as a 7-foot oak door coming into a stone rebate silently. And he did not stop counting. He walked down those 3 stones backwards, still counting, and he turned around in the road with his back to the truck, and he walked to it backwards, counting, and he got in, and he counted while he started the engine, and he counted the 11.5 miles down to State Route 9, and he counted for the first 40 minutes of the drive west, and somewhere around Hendon he realized he was still doing it, and could not remember deciding to keep going. He was 38 years old. He counted himself to sleep every night for the next 25 years. He went back to Charleston. He rented a house on Ohio Avenue. He took a job with a restoration outfit that did courthouse and church work all over the southern half of the state, and he was good at it, and within 2 years he was running crews. He put the ledger in a footlocker under his bed, wrapped in the oilcloth, and did not open it. He put brackets and a bar on the front door and the back door of a rented house in a city of 70,000 people. And when the landlord objected, Owen Pruitt paid him $40 and put them in anyway. And he counted. Every night, in bed, in the dark, out loud, with the hole in it. His neighbors on Ohio Avenue in 1980 could hear a man's voice through the wall most nights saying numbers, and they decided he was praying, and they were kind about it. And in February of 1981, Orlean Cobb died. Hollis Teague wrote him a letter. It is 3 sentences long, and I have seen it, and I am going to give it to you whole, because those 3 sentences are the entire back half of this case. Owen. Orlean passed the 9th, in her bed, and she had barred the door, and there was salt in the sill, so it was nothing but 90-year-old. There is nobody now. If you have got the book, I would take it as a favor if you would come and tell me what you mean to do with it, because I am 68 and I cannot cut marks in a board for a thing I do not understand, and I am the only one left that will even look at the wall it hangs on. Owen Pruitt read that letter in a kitchen in Charleston on the 14th of February, 1981, and he sat with it for 4 days, and on the 18th he put the footlocker in the truck and drove east. And I want to remind you of one number before I tell you what he found, because he had it written in a composition book in his own hand, and he had checked her arithmetic himself on the 14th of June, 1979, 1791, 1810, 1829, 1848, 1867, 1886, 1905, 1924, 1943, 1962, 1981. He got to Ashcombe on the 19th of February, in the snow, and the first thing he saw was that there were 4 cars parked in the gravel pull-off across from the door. 4. He slowed. He did not stop. He went on into town, and Front Street was full. 11 or 12 vehicles, which in a town of 261 people in February is a funeral or a fire. The lights were on in the church, and the lights were on in Teague's. And there were people standing on the sidewalk outside the store in the cold, which nobody in that hollow does. He parked and got out, and Hollis Teague came out of the store to meet him with his coat unbuttoned and no hat on his bald head in 28-degree weather. Hollis said, 3 days. Owen said, 3 days what? And Hollis Teague said, there has been 3 in 3 days. Here is what had happened in Ashcombe, West Virginia, in the 11 days after Orlean Cobb died. And this is in the record, and some of it is in a state police file, and none of it is in a newspaper, because there was nothing in it a newspaper could use. On the 12th of February, a man named Farrell Sizemore, 51, Lovey Sizemore's nephew, who had been drinking, drove out to the Bend at 11 at night and knocked on the door. He told 4 people he was going to do it before he did it. He said he was going to ask it about his brother, who had died in a mine accident at Beckley in 1974. He knocked, by his own account, 6 times. On the 13th, a young woman named Charlene Renner, Dwight Renner's wife, 26 years old, was hanging wash on a line at dusk and heard her mother call her name from up the hollow. Her mother had been dead since 1978, and Charlene Renner, 26 years old, standing in her own yard with a wet sheet in her hands, said, "Mama?" She answered it, and she knew it the second it came out of her mouth, because she had been raised in that hollow and she had been told, and she went in the house and barred the door and called Hollis Teague on the telephone and told him what she had done, crying, and Hollis Teague said, "You did not know," and she said, "I did know." And that is the whole of the tragedy of that place in one exchange. And on the 14th, a man named Bert Mullins, 72, went out to the Bend in daylight, on purpose, sober, with his hat in his hand, and got down on his knees at that slot and spoke into it for his wife, who had followed him and stood in the road and screamed at him the whole time, put it at 4 or 5 minutes. Nobody knows what he said. He would not tell. He came home and ate his supper and was, his wife said, the same as ever, except he would not go into a dark room. 3 in 3 days. 6 knocks, 1 answer, and 1 asking. And there was nobody to cut the board. Owen Pruitt stood on Front Street in the snow on the 19th of February, 1981, and Hollis Teague said to him, "I have got the knife. I have had the knife since Orlean passed. I cannot make myself do it. I do not know what I would be agreeing to." And Owen said, "Ma'am told me you do not get talked into it." And Hollis Teague said, "Nobody is talking you into nothing. I am telling you there is 14 marks owed on that board, and no hand to cut them, and in 3 days it will be 20. And I am 68 years old, and I am the last Teague, and when I am gone that board comes down off that wall and gets burned in a stove by whoever buys this building." They went in the store and shut the door, and Hollis put the sign over. And Owen Pruitt took the ledger out of the oilcloth and opened it on the counter for the first time since June of 1979, and he sat there under a bare bulb with a knife and a 200-year-old book and the smoke-blackened poplar board off the wall, and he did the arithmetic. 6 for Farrell Sizemore, 1 for Charlene Renner, and for Bert Mullins, who had knelt down in the dirt and asked, "And here is the thing about the third way, the bad one. The one Orlean said was never done by fools. For Bert Mullins there is no number. You do not get a count for an asking. An asking is not an amount, it is a door held open. All the ledger has ever recorded for an asking is the date, the name, and the word. He cut 7 marks in that board, 4 uprights and a diagonal, and 2 more beside them. And in the ledger he wrote 3 lines, in his own hand, the 11th hand in that book since 1788. And that was how Owen Pruitt, 39 years old, a stonemason from Merrow County by way of Dayton and Charleston, became the keeper of the count. Not by being asked, by being the only one there who knew what the board was for on a February night with a knife in his hand. Now, he did not move back. I want to be clear about that, because it is unusual and because it is the part that eventually saved his life. He kept the house on Ohio Avenue, and he kept his job, and what he did for the next 23 years was drive to Ashcombe. 4 times a year, mostly. More when there was reason. 182 miles each way. He kept the ledger in Charleston, in the Foot Locker, and Hollis Teague kept the board on the wall. And when something happened in that hollow, and it happened, on average, a little over twice a year, Hollis Teague wrote him a letter, and Owen Pruitt drove east on the weekend and cut the marks himself. He never once slept in Ashcombe again. Not one night in 23 years. He came in the morning and he left before dusk, every single time, and the one time he was late, the 11th of October, 1988, when he had a flat outside Hendon, he pulled into the churchyard on Front Street and slept in the cab of his truck with the doors locked and the counting going, and did not close his eyes. And the 1981 run finished the way Orlean Cobb's arithmetic said it would. Between the 12th of February and the 9th of November, 1981, there were 9 incidents in Ashcombe, West Virginia. 9. It is the second largest run in that book, after 1867. Farrell Sizemore left the hollow in April and died in a single-vehicle wreck outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in 1987. And I am not going to tell you that was the door, because a man who drinks and drives at night in the mountains does not need a haunting to come to that. Charlene Renner, who answered, lived until 2019. She had 4 children. She was, everybody said, entirely herself. And she could not, from the 13th of February, 1981, until the day she died, be alone in a house. Not for 10 minutes. Her husband arranged his whole working life around it. When he died in 2011, her daughter moved in with her, and when the daughter asked her mother once, gently, what exactly she was afraid of, Charlene Renner said, "I ain't afraid." I answered it, and it has been coming ever since. and I do not want it to find me by myself, because then there is only my say-so about what I do next. And Bert Mullins, who asked Bert Mullins, was found on the 4th of March, 1981, at 6 in the morning, standing in the gravel pull-off across from the door in the Hillside, in his nightclothes, in 19 degrees, 4.5 miles from his house. He was alive. He was standing. He was not cold, that is in the state police report. The trooper wrote it down twice because he did not believe it himself. A 72-year-old man standing barefoot in gravel in 19 degrees at 6 in the morning, and his skin was warm. He never spoke again, not one word, from the 4th of March, 1981, until he died in a nursing home in Hendon in 1989. The doctors could find nothing. He ate, he slept, he walked, he responded to his name. He simply never again said anything to anybody. Orlean Cobb had told Owen Pruitt in the summer of 1979 that it keeps what it gets. It does not eat it, and it does not use it, and it does not let it go. It kept Bert Mullins's voice. Let me tell you what Owen Pruitt's life looked like from the outside, from 1981 to the end, because this is the part that I think about when I am doing something ordinary, like putting a key in a lock. He was, by every account of everybody who knew him in Charleston, an entirely normal man, well-liked, a little quiet, good at his work, and generous with younger men learning it. He went to a Methodist church on Virginia Street with no great enthusiasm and no great objection. He drank 1 beer at a time, and only on Fridays. He voted. He had a dog, a beagle mix, from 1984 to 1996, named Pete. And in 1988 he met a woman named Doris Pauley, a widow, a bookkeeper for a lumber supply company, 2 years older than him, and they were together for 16 years, and they never married, and she was the one he told. Doris Pauley is the reason we have the details from the last 20 years of his life, because Owen Pruitt did not talk about Ashcombe to anybody, and he told her the whole of it on the second night she stayed at the house on Ohio Avenue in 1989, because he had to explain the counting. She said, and I have this from an interview she gave a nephew in 2011, which is how these things survive. She said, he sat me down at that kitchen table like a man confessing to a criminal record, and what it come down to was that he was going to say numbers out loud in the bed every night for the rest of his life, and I could take it or leave it. She took it. Here is the list of things she noticed, in her own words, and this is what a haunting actually looks like at a distance of 20 years. It is not screaming. It is a list of small accommodations that a household makes without ever discussing them again. He barred the doors at dusk. Not at bedtime, dusk. In a city, 16 years. If they were out at a restaurant and the light started to go, he would get restless in a way she learned not to comment on, and they left, and it was fine. He counted out loud in bed every night, and got one wrong, and if she interrupted him, he started over. She said it took him between 2 and 11 minutes depending on the night, and that she got so used to it that when she stayed at her sister's in Beckley, she could not sleep in the quiet. He would not have a mirror in a hallway, any hallway. He kept salt in the sill of the front and back door of a rented house on Ohio Avenue in Charleston, West Virginia, and renewed it every spring, and when they moved to a smaller place on Grant Street in 1994, he salted that one before the furniture went in. He never in 16 years said his own wife's name out loud. Not once. He talked about her, he talked about Ruth a great deal, in fact, and Doris said she never minded it, and that a man who can talk about the one before is a man who has room in him. But he said, my wife. He said she. He never said the name. Doris asked him about it exactly one time, and he said, I do not put her name out in a room, and that was the end of the conversation forever. And when he went up a staircase, anywhere, for the rest of his life, he counted the treads out loud and got one wrong. He did that in a hardware store in 1992 in front of 11 people, and a clerk asked him if he was all right, and Owen Pruitt said, old habit, and went on up. That is what it costs. Orlean Cobb told him on a porch on the 19th of May, 1979, that the counting works and that nobody gets to put it down after, and she was right, and he paid it for 25 years without complaining once. Ashcombe kept shrinking. The post office closed in 1992. The store Teague's closed in 1995, when Hollis Teague was 82, and he sold the building to a man from Hendon who used it for storage. And on the day he closed it, the 29th of September, 1995, Hollis Teague took the two boards off the wall behind the stove, the old one full and the new one better than half, and he wrapped them in a bedsheet, and he drove them 182 miles to Charleston himself at 82 years old and put them in Owen Pruitt's hands on the front porch of a house on Grant Street. He said, "I have not had a full night's sleep since I was 9 years old, and my granddaddy told me about that door. I am 82. I am done. It is all yours, and I am sorry." He died the following March. Owen kept the boards in the footlocker with the ledger. And here is a thing I find almost unbearable, and it is in Doris Pauley's account. From 1995 until 2004, there was nobody left in Ashcombe to tell him when something happened. So he called. Once a month, on the first Sunday, from a kitchen in Charleston, Owen Pruitt telephoned 4 households in Ashcombe, West Virginia, in rotation, and asked how everybody was, and listened, and if there was anything in it, a man who had gone strange, a woman who had heard something, a boy on a dare. He wrote it in the ledger and cut it in the board. 11 marks between 1995 and 2004. 11 in a town that was down to under 100 people. He drove out there twice a year to the end of his life, and on every single trip he stopped at the bend and got out and looked at the door. He never touched it again. He never went up the steps. He stood in the road at about 30 feet for a few minutes and looked at it and got back in the truck and drove on. Doris asked him why, once, and he said something that took her a long time to understand and that I did not understand myself until I had read everything twice. He said, "Somebody has got to have laid eyes on it recent." Tildy Cobb, in 1936, in the road to a federal surveyor. That hill has had eyes on it every day of every one of those years, and I would not care to be the man who takes the eyes away. That is what the pull-off is. That is why there is a gravel turnout on a county road at a place with no view and no trailhead and no mailbox, kept clear, graveled inside the last few years by somebody. It is not for tourists. Ashcombe has never had a tourist. It is a place to stand and look at it. And now I am going to tell you about the last night of Owen Pruitt's life, and then I am going to tell you what was in that footlocker when they opened it, and then I am going to ask you a question. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in June of 2004. He was 63 years old. It was found late, the way it is, and the doctors gave him 3 to 6 months and were nearly exactly right. He spent most of it at the house on Grant Street with Doris and a hospice nurse coming 3 times a week. He was clear-headed almost the whole way. He made his arrangements. He sold his tools himself, to men he chose, at prices below what they were worth, which annoyed Doris and which he did not budge on. And in September, when he could still get in a truck, he asked her to drive him to Ashcombe. She did. 182 miles each way, in a day, with a man who weighed 130 pounds. They stopped at the bend, and she helped him out, and he stood in the road at about 30 feet for 11 minutes in the October sun. And then he got back in, and they drove into town, and he sat in the car outside the old store for a while, and then they drove home. She said he did not say anything the whole way except one thing, coming back down out of the hollow. And what he said was, "I have not found anybody." He died on the 11th of December, 2004, at 4 in the morning, in a hospital bed in the front room of a house on Grant Street in Charleston, West Virginia. And I am going to tell you exactly what happened in that room in the last 2 hours of his life, because Doris Pauley wrote it down in the week after he died, longhand, 4 pages, and she gave those pages to her nephew, and I have read them. On the 10th of December, 2004, Owen Pruitt was mostly asleep. He had stopped eating on the 7th. The nurse had been that afternoon and had told Doris, in the kitchen, in the way they do, that it would likely be that night or the next. At dusk, and Doris Pauley wrote in her account that she looked at the clock because he had trained her to, and it was 5:22 in the evening. Owen woke up enough to say, "Bar it." She barred the front door and the back door of a house in Charleston, West Virginia, in December of 2004 because a dying man asked her to, and then she came and sat down beside him. He slept until about 10. At 10 he woke up, and he was clear, and he asked her for water, and she gave him some off a sponge, and then he said, "Is there salt in the sill?" She said there was. She had done it in the spring, the way he did it, because by then she did it, and had done it for years, and did not think about why. And he said, "Good." And he lay back and he said, "Doris, I have to count now." And she said, "All right." And Owen Pruitt started counting out loud, in a whisper, because that was all he had left, and he got the 6th one wrong, the way he had gotten one wrong every night since the 29th of May, 1979. At about 11:30, according to her account, somebody came up on the porch. Now, I have to be scrupulous here, and I am going to be, because this is the one part of this entire case that rests on a single witness at an hour when that witness had been awake for 2 days beside a man she loved who was dying. Doris Pauley wrote, "There was somebody on the porch. I heard the boards. Owen had them boards fixed himself in '98, and I knew every sound they made. It walked the length of the porch, and it stopped at the door." She wrote, "I did not get up. I want it wrote down that I did not get up, because I have thought about it every day since, and I do not know if I did right, and I would like somebody someday to tell me I did." And she wrote, "It knocked one time, one knock, on the front door of a house on Grant Street in Charleston, 182 miles from a bend in a county road in Merrill County, at 11:30 at night on the 10th of December, 2004. And then a woman's voice on the porch said, 'Owen.'" And Doris Pauley, 65 years old, a retired bookkeeper for a lumber supply company, who had been told the whole of it at a kitchen table in 1989, and had believed about half of it for 15 years, and all of it for about the last 10 seconds, put her hand on the rail of a hospital bed and did the only thing there was to do. She counted, out loud. And she got one wrong. She wrote, "I did not know if I was allowed. I am not from there. Nobody ever give me no rules. But I have laid beside that man for 16 year listening to him do it, and I knowed how it went, and I got the 9th one wrong, and I kept on." And Owen woke up. She wrote that he opened his eyes and turned his head and looked at her, and that he was entirely there, the way people sometimes are at the end, and that he listened to her counting for a little while, and then he started counting with her, in a whisper, off her numbers, in time getting the same one wrong. The two of them counted together in that room, for she put it at more than an hour, and she said she did not look at the clock again, and I believe her. And at some point in it, the voice on the porch stopped saying his name and started saying hers. She wrote, "It called me Doris in my mother's voice, and I want to say for the record that my mother has been dead since 1971, and I have not heard that voice in 33 years, and it was her, and it said, 'Doris, Doris, honey,' one time each, and I did not stop counting, and Owen did not stop counting, and after that it never said nothing else. At about 1 in the morning she said, 'The boards again, one step,' going away. Owen Pruitt stopped counting a little after 2. He was tired. He asked her, once in a whisper, what number they were on, and she told him, and he said, 'That is not right,' and she said, 'I know it,' and he laughed. That is the last thing he did that anybody recorded. He laughed at a wrong number. He died at 4 in the morning on the 11th of December, 2004. And Doris Pauley sat with him until it got light, and she did not take the bar out of the brackets until the sun was up, because that was the rule, and by then she was a person who kept the rules. Now, the footlocker. It was under his bed, where it had been since 1979. He had told her about it, and he had left a letter with the lawyer about it, and the instructions in the letter were specific and strange, and she followed them exactly. In it were these things: the ledger, bound account book, marbled boards, red spine, swollen so it would not shut flat. 216 years of dates and names and one of 3 words in 11 hands. The 2 poplar boards, the old one full 411 marks, cut by hand, one at a time, by people who had to sit down and do it. The new one, started by Tildy Cobb in 1931, with, at the time of his death, 103. Isaac Pell's journal, in the poplar box with his name burned in the lid, and the 8 straightened nails still loose in the bottom of it, where somebody had put them in 1937 or 1938, or where they had ended up. 4 composition books in Owen Pruitt's own hand, the first one begun on the 4th of May, 1979, and a folded map. It was a state highway map of West Virginia, the 1976 edition, folded to the eastern quarter, and it had been carried in a pocket for a long time, and it had come apart at 3 of the creases and been mended with tape. There were 4 marks on it, in pencil, each one a small, careful X with a date beside it in Owen Pruitt's handwriting. Merrow County, on the county road east of Ashcombe, scene 1979. Merrow County, on the flank of Coldwater Knob, about a half-mile north-northeast of the first, scene 1979. Pocahontas County, in a creek bed above Hosterman, scene 1986. Randolph County, above the head of a hollow off the Dry Fork, scene 1993. 4 doors. He had gone and found the other 2. In 1986 and 1993, on his own, with a topographic map and a truck and a piece of mason's line, a man who barred his doors at dusk and counted himself to sleep, drove out into 2 other counties and walked up into 2 other hollows and stood in front of 2 more doors of white oak, 7 feet 1 inch by 3 feet 4, hung to swing inward, in dry-laid frames of a pale hard stone that does not come from where it is, with a slot 34 inches up, and there was a 5th mark on that map. It was not an X, it was a circle, drawn in pencil, about 4 miles across, in Nicholas County, with a question mark inside it, and no date. And folded inside the map was a single page in his own handwriting, undated, written near the end, and it is addressed to whoever opened that footlocker, and it is the last thing I am going to read you tonight. If you have got this, then I am gone, and either I found you, or nobody did, and this fell to you by accident. Both of them have happened before in this book, and neither one is better than the other. Here is what I know, and it is not much for 25 years. It cannot take. It has never taken. Everything it has ever got, somebody handed it. That is not a comfort, and I do not offer it as one, because the handing is easy. I very near handed it everything I had on the 10th of June, 1979, and I had studied it, and I had the rules from the best that ever had them, and my hand was on the bar. It does not want you. It wants the shape of what you lost. If you have not lost anybody yet, it has got no use for you, and that is why the young laugh at it. Wait. Bar at dusk. Salt the sills in the spring. Count out loud, and get one wrong on purpose, and do not ever, for any reason, hand it a whole thing. When it comes wearing somebody, find the little thing it got wrong, and say the wrong thing out loud to its face. That is the only weapon anybody has ever had. And if you find the door standing open, do not walk off and leave it. Put your back to it, set your heels in the sill, count, and walk it shut. Somebody has to. There is not anybody else. There has never been anybody else. That is what the whole book is, 200 years of there not being anybody else. Keep the count. Cut it, do not write it, do not add it up, and go and look at it a few times a year so that it has been looked at. I am sorry to hand you this. Orlean Cobb was sorry to hand it to me, and she did it right, which is to say, she did not ask me, and I am not asking you. O. D. Pruitt. Now let me answer the question you have been carrying for the last hour, which is, how do I know any of this? The footlocker went to Doris Pauley, and Doris Pauley kept it under a bed on Grant Street for 7 years and did not open it more than twice, and when she went into assisted living in 2011, it went to her nephew, and her nephew is a retired schoolteacher in Kanawha County, who I am not going to name because he asked me not to. He is the one who wrote down her account. He is the one who read the 4 composition books through, twice, and typed them because he could see the paper going. He is the one who wrote to the district office and got the WPA project file with Isaac Pell's personnel note in it and his wife's 4 letters. And in 2018, he drove to Merrow County and found the pull-off and stood in the road. He is the reason there is a case here at all instead of a rumor. And I want to say plainly that he has never asked for anything, and that when I asked him why he had spent 7 years of his retirement on it, he said, because somebody left it to somebody, and it got to me. And I did not want to be the one it stopped at. Ashcombe, West Virginia, in the last census that separately reported it, had 31 people. The church holds services twice a month. The store is a storage building with the windows painted over. The school has been gone since 1966 and the post office since 1992, and there is no gas within 11 miles. The county road still runs along the base of Coldwater Knob, because a hub would not stay where a man put it in 1936. And the door is still there. It is still 7 feet, 1 inch by 3 feet, 4 inches. It is still white oak in a dry-laid frame of pale stone that the State Geological Survey has now looked at 3 times, most recently in 2009, and has 3 times declined to place. It still has no handle on the outside. It still has a slot 1.5 inches by 1/2 inch, 34 inches above a sill that is worn 1 inch deep in the middle by people standing on the outside of it. It still opens inward, and the gravel pull-off across the road from it is still kept clear, and somebody has put fresh gravel on it within the last few years, and I would very much like to know who, and I have asked, and nobody in Merrow County has been able to tell me. The last thing. That map had 4 X's on it, and 1 circle with a question mark in it in Nicholas County, and no date because he died before he could go. I have had that map in my hands. I have looked at that circle for a long time. And there are 2 things about it I am going to leave with you, and then I am going to stop. The first is that the 4 confirmed doors, when you lay them out on a map and draw the lines, are not in a pattern anybody has been able to make anything of. They are not a square. They are not equidistant. They do not sit on any ley line or fault line or watershed divide that means a thing. 2 of them are a 1/2 mile apart. 2 of them are 81 miles apart. If there is a shape in it, it needs more points before anybody can see it, which is another way of saying there are more. And the second thing is this. Owen Pruitt drew that circle in pencil around a piece of Nicholas County, West Virginia, and put a question mark in it. And he did not put a date beside it because he never got there to look. And in the ledger, the real one, the account book, the one that runs from 1788, that I have read every page of, there is 1 entry after the 11th of December, 2004. It is written under the last line Owen Pruitt ever wrote, in a hand that is not his, and is not Doris Pauley's, and is not her nephew's, and has never appeared anywhere else in 238 years of that book. It is dated the 9th of March, 2005. There is no name in the name column, and the word in the 3rd column is asked. So, here is what I want to ask you. Have you ever been in a house at night and heard someone you loved and lost say your name one time, from a room you know is empty, or from a yard you know is dark, and stood there with your hand already halfway to the door before you understood what you were doing? And did it say it twice? Because if it said it twice, you probably told yourself that meant it was a person. That is what most people tell themselves. It is what a good man behind a store counter in Merrow County told a stonemason in April of 1979, in good faith, from the best knowledge his family had, and it very nearly cost that man everything at 11 o'clock at night on the 10th of June. It says it once from the hill. It says it as many times as it likes from the porch. Tell me in the comments. I want to hear it, the town, the county, the night, the voice, especially if you are from that country, and especially if you know a place that people drive around instead of through, or a turnout on a road that has no reason to be there and never has weeds in it. Somebody reading your comment is going to know exactly the place you mean, and that is worth more than you think it is, because the one thing this whole 200-year record says over and over is that the people who go under are the ones who are the only one who knows. If you want more of these, the collection is What the Hollow Keeps, 12 files, 4 states, told out at this length, link in the description and pinned up top. And subscribe if you have not, because the next one is already written, and the next one is a lighthouse on the Michigan shore where the keeper's log for 1894 has 41 consecutive entries in the same handwriting, and the keeper had been dead since March. Until then, bar it at dusk, salt the sill in the spring, and when you count, get one wrong.